How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Should we just start with like the theme song from Terminator? I know
Todd,
I was going to say Todd
usually does it.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever discussed Arnold or the Terminator without Todd at some point doing that song.
It's good. It gets in your head. I've been listening to it today. It's catchy.
I've been listening to the Austrian Death Machine version.
Oh, I don't know what that is. Is that just Arnold yelling into a microphone?
It is, but it's also it's like a heavy metal. It's the heavy metal version, so it's more guitars and heavier drums, and it's badass. It's pretty cool, honestly.
Couldn't find where to put this in the notes, so I'll just say it now. On our other Terminator episode, I mentioned how there was the ending filmed where it shows the folks in Cyberdyne collecting the chip and the arm and stuff. Yeah. In the commentary, Cameron brings it back up. And I don't know why I cannot find footage of this, but he says it existed, but he had to remove it because, quote, it was terribly acted, frankly.
It was just, and it wasn't any of the regular players, I guess, from the movie. It would
Yeah,
have
I
been
guess
like
so.
That's funny.
Some day,
that was
some day players.
Yeah, maybe that's why it's never been released as like a deleted scene or anything like that.
Yeah.
Hey man, look what I found. And this too.
Oh wow, it's Bill Paxton in that scene too.
It does sound like Bill Paxton. Yeah, I'm gonna start this episode so that maybe one day it ends. Well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock, the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We're just a few friends that love movies and love talking about them, and we read and write about them a lot and all of that stuff. So that's what we're doing here with
and we watch them too.
We did watch them too. We didn't just Anyway, that's who we are. That's what we do. Hi, I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
Hey, I'm Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. And thank you for joining us for our discussion of one of the greatest action films of all time, one of the greatest sequels of all time, with one of the biggest stars of all time. Now, this might sound like easy money, but as we get into it, you'll see how this production came about through financial failings, fisticuffs, and Arnie approving the script on a jet plane. In this fourth installment of our examination of the career of James Cameron, the man of tomorrow.
Well, I, for one, am happy that we decided to start introing this way.
I am too, honestly.
Make up these things. And my disgust at the beginning, or it wasn't disgust that I said so that one day this will end. It's just that I never knew how long a podcast could be until we started talking about James Cameron movies.
Never knew how long a movie could be until we started watching James Cameron movies.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah,
that guy holds nothing back.
You just wait till we get to Titanic and the extended edition of Avatar.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
All right. So after The Abyss, on our last episode, after The Abyss failed to meet box office expectations, James Cameron, he figured he'd better move on to his next project right away. He wanted to kind of, he didn't want to lose any of the momentum that he'd built up. He wanted to start working on something before people decided that maybe he shouldn't be given that much money again. And then around Christmas of 1989, this is about 4 months after The Abyss had been released in theaters, Cameron received a call from a guy named Mario Kasser and a guy named Andrew Vajna, the heads of Carolco Pictures.
I want you to know that's not how I originally read that name.
Carol Co. was an independent production company that had been founded back in 1976, but they had first truly come into success in 1982 with the release of First Blood, the first Rambo movie.
Yeah, it's great.
The success of First Blood and its sequel, which, as we've mentioned before, was co-written by James Cameron, sort of. They were so instrumental to Carol Co.'s success that they focused their entire output after that on big budget action films with major stars like Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Red Heat, for instance, starring Schwarzenegger, was released in the summer of 1988, just a few weeks after Rambo 3, which they also produced. And then they would also produce Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall in 1990. Nice. So they were kind of in the Arnold Schwarzenegger business. And he was kind of friends with these guys at this point. Kasser and Vajna, they had ambitions to become big players in Hollywood, and they were spending money accordingly. They were I wouldn't say hemorrhaging money, because their movies were making a lot of money in returns, but they were spending a lot to get them made and a lot to establish these big stars in their films. And they had bought the rights to the Terminator for about $10 million. And then they asked James Cameron to write and direct a sequel. So there had been some discussion of a Terminator sequel in the past. Schwarzenegger was a lot more enthusiastic about the idea than Cameron, because Cameron thought that he'd said all that he wanted to say with the original film. But one of the main reasons that a sequel never actually moved forward is because Cameron and Schwarzenegger refused to work with Hemdell. Remember, Hemdell Productions, who produced the first film, they owned the rights to the film, or they own part of the rights. John Daly, Hemdell's co-founder, had tried to alter the ending of the Terminator against Cameron's wishes, and the two almost physically came to blows over it. Like, they almost got in a fist fight over that. Cameron, yeah. But a sequel couldn't happen without Hemdell's approval, because 50% of the rights to the Terminator had been surrendered to Hemdell in order to get the movie made. That was part of the deal that they made on that film. The other half was owned by Gale and Hurd, who you may remember had purchased the rights to the Terminator from Cameron for $1. By 1990, Cameron, Schwarzenegger, Hurd, and Stan Winston were actually suing Hemdell for unpaid profits from that film. So it wasn't a great relationship.
Nothing brings people together like a fight over money.
Yeah, a lawsuit. Yeah. But what they didn't know is that Hemdell was having some financial difficulties by the early 90s. I won't get into a lot of details on it. I did look it up, but it's kind of boring. A lot of it involves HBO, like rights for movies going to HBO, a lot of video rights, like VHS releases and things like that. It's all very complicated and lawyery and boring. Regardless, they were struggling. It was actually Schwarzenegger who persuaded Kasser and Vajna to purchase the rights to the Terminator after paying Hemdell their $10 million. And they paid Hurd an additional $5 million for her half of the rights, plus incidental costs. Carol Co. spent about $17 million after all that to secure the rights to the film before any development had even begun. $17 million. Remember, Aliens, which was a pretty big budget for its time. This was only half a decade earlier, cost $18 million.
Oh, wow.
All in all. And they've already spent $17 million on the Terminator or to get the rights to the Terminator before they've even got a script or even a director. James Cameron hasn't signed on at this point, so they're already $17 million in the hole. So Gary, I on our last episode on The Abyss, towards the end, you read a quote from James Cameron about his thoughts on doing a sequel to one of his own films. Would you mind reading that quote again?
Yeah, it's from Conversations with the Filmmaker series. He basically was being asked about directing Blade Runner 2, which was the rumor at the time, right after Aliens. And he said, "I have nothing to do with Blade Runner 2. I wouldn't be interested. And I don't want to go around cleaning up after Ridley Scott for the rest of my life, nor will I sequelize my own films."
So he sounded pretty adamant about it at the time. Well, what happened was Kasser met with Cameron, and he explained that this movie's going to go forward with or without him. They had just invested $17 million in it. They're going to find somebody to direct this movie, whether or not it's James Cameron. Well, as it turns out, Cameron was willing to go back on his word about doing a sequel to one of his own films for a price. He later said, "They offered me a lot of money. I can be bought." His price tag, at least at that time, was about $6 million. So they're like, hey, James, we want we're going to do this movie. We want you to write and direct it. We will pay you $6 million to do it. To which he said, oh yeah, okay.
And this probably doesn't stand for him now, but I can guarantee you there is very little, nay, nothing I wouldn't do for $6 million. Probably.
Yeah.
Nice.
$6 million to Cameron now is chump change.
Yeah.
Because he's probably worth $1 billion or close to it.
That's, that's body paint budget,
yeah.
man.
He's probably legitimately probably worth $500 million, at this point. But at the time, he was a big deal, but he wasn't that big a deal. And directors weren't getting paid the way some of them are now. So for Arnold, they needed Arnold to do this as well. And again, he was friends with these guys, but they gave him, to persuade him to do it, gifted him a $12 million Gulfstream jet to sign on. That was his signing bonus for this, a personal jet.
Just for the record, according to the Google machine, 700 million estimated right
is
now.
what he's worth.
Yeah.
So $750 million.
Yeah.
There you go. It's insane. Carolco at the time had an existing distribution deal with TriStar Pictures for a set percentage of the budget, about $4 million. And TriStar wanted the film to be ready for release on Memorial Day, 1991. And the film went forward with an estimated cost of about $60 million. Of course, this is a James Cameron movie, so we know that he's not going to hit that budget or that release date. But the investors weren't too mad about it because the resulting film at the time of its release would become the third highest grossing movie of all time. We're talking, obviously, we haven't said the name of the movie yet, but we're talking, of course, about Terminator 2 Judgment Day.
Same make.
These were taken at the West Highland Police Station, 1984. You were there.
Same model.
These were taken today.
You have to let me see my son. He's in great danger.
New mission. Once, he was programmed to destroy the future.
You don't know what it's like to try to kill one of these things.
Now, his mission
Get down.
is to protect it.
Come with me if you want to live.
You're really real.
His loyalty is to a child.
Who sent you?
You did. 35 years from now.
And his enemy
He's a Terminator like you, right?
Not like me.
is the deadliest machine ever built.
Can it be destroyed?
Unknown.
This time, there are two. Terminator 2.
You just can't go around killing people.
Why?
If you thought you had seen it all, look again.
Stay down!
Go! Now!
We gotta stick together!
Arnold Schwarzenegger. Terminator 2, Judgment Day. This time, he's back. For good.
Trust me.
Now, we at Cinema Shock understand that this might be your first time listening to us. Again, welcome. But also be warned, if you, for some reason, have not seen Terminator 2 Judgment Day, we're going to talk about it at length in great detail. So spoilers abound. You have been warned.
Yes. Also, just go watch Terminator 2. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's a really great movie. And if you're thinking like, I didn't see the first one, I can't watch the second one, you totally can. It's fine.
Yeah, but also see the first one because it's also
yeah.
and then go listen to our episode on that one.
I happen to like the first one a lot. So
Hey, the first one's amazing. They're both outstanding films.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Cameron is not one to rest on his laurels, even between developing films. And in the years between The Abyss and Terminator 2, his personal and professional life had continued to evolve. On the professional side of things, in early 1990, he'd founded his own production company, Lightstorm Entertainment. Lightstorm named after the effect of when the Terminator arrives in the first film, the lightning and everything.
Oh, yeah.
That's your Lightstorm. So that's where the name of Lightstorm Entertainment comes from. And Lightstorm Entertainment would go on to produce not only his own films, but other films that he was involved with, either as a writer or an executive producer. And on the personal side of things, he had found a new love in his life. So before production began on The Abyss, we talked a little bit about this in our Abyss episode. He and Gail Ann Hurd, his wife at the time, they were separating. And during that separation, he began dating Catherine Bigelow. So Bigelow is also a director. She has gone on to helm award-winning films like The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. But her first film was a movie called The Loveless. It was released in 1981. It was co-directed by Monty Montgomery. Do you guys know who Monty Montgomery is? So he is a producer mostly. He doesn't really direct. But if you've ever seen Mulholland Drive, Have you guys seen Mulholland Drive?
Oh yeah, David Lynch.
He's the cowboy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If you've seen Mulholland Drive, then you know.
I haven't seen Mulholland Drive.
Oh man, you just wait till we do a David Lynch.
I was about to say we're definitely going to do a David Lynch.
It's on the docket.
Nice.
But if you've seen Mulholland Drive, you know who the cowboy is, and Monty Montgomery is the cowboy. So The Loveless was co-directed by Monty Montgomery. It featured Willem Dafoe in his first starring role. Then her second feature, which was her first directed as a solo project, was the vampire Western hybrid Near Dark, which starred several Cameron regulars, including Bill Paxton, Lance Henriksen, and Jeanette Goldstein. If you haven't seen Near Dark, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's one of my favorite vampire movies of all time. It's really rad. Really good stuff. So while Cameron was in South Carolina shooting The Abyss, Bigelow was in New York directing her next film, which was the Jamie Lee Curtis movie Blue Steel, where Jamie Lee Curtis plays a cop. I haven't seen it in years, but I remember it being pretty good. But they would fly to see each other on the weekends. And then after The Abyss was released, the couple ended up getting married. So just as he had worked with Heard professionally, he and Bigelow had a working relationship as well, although the roles were kind of reversed, with Cameron producing and Bigelow directing. The first Bigelow film that he produced was a little script that Bigelow had come across called Johnny Utah. The script was apparently not really great, but it had a lot of promise. And Cameron helped Bigelow to rewrite it as much as he could, because he's prepping Terminator 2 actually at the same time. But he's helping her to kind of rewrite it to make it a little more darker, a little more psychological. And I'm sure, as most of our listeners probably know, the script would eventually become Point Break, effectively launching Bigelow's career as an action movie director and turning Keanu Reeves into a star. I mean, he had already done Bill and Ted at this point, but Point Break's the one that made him like a bankable movie star.
Yeah, the original script was by a guy named Peter Liff, but Bigelow really dug it, and Cameron agreed to executive produce it for her, because men will do anything for love or carnal pleasures, I suppose. I was digging into this just because I love that movie. I didn't even know this was a thing until last episode. So she'd actually had stuff well in hand up until about the principal production was about to start, and she just was never happy with the script. So Cameron offered to team up with her and rewrite it, because men will do anything for love. Or anyway, I just stay on it for a minute, because it's worth noting how this is the second time brother did this. Like, remember Aliens and Rambo at the same time.
Yeah.
So just know, while Cameron and Wisher are going to be working on T2, Cameron is also rewriting Point Break for Bigelow,
which he's uncredited on, I believe.
So I found a little bit of an interview with him when he talks about it. He got back down to a serious formula that he had that we talked about in like Aliens. Yeah. No sleep, excessive coffee.
Sounds like me when I'm working on notes for this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. He's careful to not take too much credit, though, in anything from Bigelow, which I think people were trying to do in interviews afterwards, were like trying to connect it to him too much. I found a quote from him from a convention in 1991 where somebody asked him about it. He said, quote, "I was executive producer of Point Break. I did a considerable amount of writing on the shooting draft of the script with Catherine. And even though we haven't received credit, which is an issue I still have with the Writers Guild, she basically 100% is responsible for the final film from that point on. I made a few phone calls here and there, but I was kind of busy myself." Anyway, I just thought this was a good example of what a great workhorse this guy is. But apparently, if you watch Point Break with this knowledge now, which I haven't seen since I know this, you could pick up on the vibe for sure. And especially Cameron's love for like getting to a climax and you think that's it. And then he just does a whole nother thing after that, which is kind of like Justin's mom, but you got to pay extra.
Nice.
And also, I love getting into the heart of these directors sometimes. I think that was fun. Like Shane Black, I like tried to make the whole thing about him as a person. Yeah. But you don't find like as much about that with Cameron. And so like, I know that like people probably hear us talking about these wives are more curious about it. And we've kind of mentioned this before, but you know, because he was with Heard, he was with the girl before Heard, who is the inspiration for Sarah Connor. Then he's with Catherine Bigelow. Like right after this, he'll end up divorcing Catherine Bigelow and moving in with Linda Hamilton. Just a bunch of really tough women, though. The only thing I can find him explaining any of this is that he does say at one point, he picks women who don't need him. And eventually they realize it.
Yeah. He does have a type. I mean, if you've ever seen Catherine Bigelow, she's 6 feet tall. She's gorgeous. She looks like she would also kick your ass if you got out of line. Like he's very much got a type. I mean, it's the type of women that he writes. It's Ellen Ripley, it's Sarah Connor. Like the type of women that he writes in his action movies are the type of women that he seems to be attracted to in real life.
Nice.
You know?
Yeah. So he just has a string of them, and I guess eventually they get sick of him. His brother, like in some stuff you'll read from him, Mike Cameron, he says he's tough, and he's especially tough on the people he cares about the most. So it eventually just, I guess unless you're Mike Cameron and you're stuck with him because blood, then, whatever.
Well, Susie Amos, who's his current wife, they've been married for like over 20 years now, I think. So I think he finally has settled down a little bit. He's also, I wouldn't say he's toned himself down a little bit. He is more aware of his behavior when he was younger, like being kind of a dick on set, and he tries to be, I guess, nicer now, but he's still, I mean, I was reading interviews with him this week where he was talking about people bitching about the length of Avatar, and he's like, listen, my kids watch 7 fucking episodes of Stranger Things in a row. If you can sit down and watch like 7 or 8 episodes of a Netflix show in a row, you can watch a 3-hour movie. It's fine. He's like, sometimes people are worried about having to get up and go pee. He's like, who cares? Get up and go pee. Like, it doesn't matter.
Reading through 100 interviews with him too, I found this one quote that I wasn't sure where to use it, but this is perfect timing too. He says, people ask me all the time how I become a film director or how to become a film director. And I tell them, if you have to ask somebody like me how to be a film director, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And if that pisses you off, and then you go out and say, I want to fucking show Jim Cameron, I'm going to be a director. And that gives you the actual true grit you need to be or need to have in order to actually go through with it. And you become a film director, then you better send me a bottle of champagne and thank me.
Yeah, he talks about that a little bit on his masterclass where he's like, what does it take to become a film director? Pick up a camera and shoot something. There, you're a director. That it's just like, you just got to get out there and do it. I mean, that's what he does.
That's similar to advice I got about working in the comic book industry.
Yeah.
And doing stand-up comedy. Like, if you want to do stand-up comedy, there's your stage. Go up there.
That's how we started this podcast. Like, me and Gary were talking about it forever. Then one day I'm just like, let's just fucking do it. Let's just record something. And we did. And it was probably terrible, but we eventually figured it out. Sort of. I mean, we're still figuring it out, but we're better than we were like 6 years ago or 7 years ago or whatever the hell that was.
I used to read Brian Michael Bendis, the comic writer, Q&As, and then we'll shut up about this. But I used to read his stuff all the time, and he would constantly get those questions like, how do I become a writer? His answer was always, I don't know, man. Writer's right. That's just what you do.
This is what you do. Everyone has a different process,
Yeah.
So speaking of writing, though, so Cameron's got a scheduled release date in place. That gives him about 6 or 7 weeks to write a sequel to The Terminator. Luckily, he already had an idea, though. So after signing on to the project, his first thought was of a concept that he had actually envisioned for the original. So when he was first conceiving The Terminator, his original outline, he had 2 Terminators being sent from the future. The first one, which was basically the T-800 model that Schwarzenegger plays, gets dispatched by Kyle Reese about halfway through the story. So following that, the machines in the future reluctantly send a second Terminator. The second Terminator was one that was so powerful that even the machines were kind of scared to send it, but they kind of did it as like a, last it. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the second Terminator was made of liquid metal and couldn't be destroyed by any conventional weapon. So Cameron, he's developing the Terminator, and he's trying to think of a way to depict the liquid metal Terminator using early 1980s technology. He thought claymation might be the answer, but he wasn't really sure. He wasn't sure if he could really pull it off. And in the end, he decided that he'd probably written too much story anyway, which is probably the only time in his career that Cameron had that thought. He figured funding would also be difficult with the ambitious script that he had written, so he cut the story down to be just about the T-800, which turned the film into less of a big effects picture and more of a traditional shoot 'em up, and thus an easier sell to potential financiers. But he never forgot about that idea he had about this liquid metal man. So after the pioneering CGI that was used to create the water tentacle in the abyss, he now knew that this might be possible. So one thing that we have not really touched on with Cameron is that despite the fact that he grew up writing short sci-fi stories, he never really seemed to enjoy the process of screenwriting. He just doesn't like it. He likes coming up with stories. I think he just doesn't like the idea of sitting down at a typewriter and hammering it out in, screenplay format and all that.
It's incredibly tedious.
Yeah.
Like the creation part is hard enough. Then to actually get it into the correct format is just nails on a chalkboard.
So when he signed on to do Terminator 2, he enlisted the help of his friend Bill Wisher. Now, you may remember Wisher actually helped Cameron write several scenes in the original Terminator, although he doesn't receive any screen credit. But he did write some pretty integral scenes, like the tech noir scene was his. Like a few really good scenes in that were written by Bill Wisher.
Yeah, we mentioned very briefly in the Terminator episode, but yeah, Wisher is one of Cameron's best friends since like 1972. They're still friends.
They grew up together in Brea. Yeah, they went to high school together, I think, or college.
Yeah, well, to hear him describe it, it was basically like a year. Cameron was out of high school a year, and he was dating a girl that was friends with Wisher, and she thought that, well, this was actually Sharon Williams, Cameron's first wife. He was dating her, and she was friends with Wisher, and she thought they'd get along because they were both, quote, into movies, science fiction, and all that stuff.
Nerds.
This is Sharon Williams, who was the inspiration for Sarah Connor again.
Right.
I actually saw some there. He's got that book, Tech Noir, The Art of James Cameron, and he had drawn some pictures of her with some notes about Sarah Connor and stuff. It was so you can kind of see him working her out as that thing, but just kind of cool. But anyway, but this guy, they're still friends. He went to the bottom of the Atlantic with him on the Expedition Bismarck, which is one of his deep sea things that got filmed. Anyway, Wisher, as far as I could find in the original, he was responsible for most scenes involving Sarah Connor and the LAPD story arc stuff.
The assault on the police station.
Yeah. And he's actually in all the movies for what it's worth too. He's in Xenogenesis as Raj, the main dude. In the OG Terminator, he's the cop that shows up at the Tech Noir shootout that Arnold smacks his face into the window and steals the car.
He had started his career. He's the star of Xenogenesis. He's the main character in that, and he had started his career wanting to be an actor, not to be a writer. That was not his ambition.
Yeah, and in T2, he's actually in there even by accident because like some dude missed his flight or something. But he's the dude in the mall taking pics of Arnold when he's getting up from being thrown through the window. But yeah, he says he was just hanging out, got a call from Jim Cameron, and Cameron says, "Good news, man. We're doing Terminator 2. Bad news, man. We're behind schedule."
Yeah, Bill Wisher is one of those, I don't know, kind of unsung screenwriters because he has had his hand in a lot of stuff. I mean, he co-wrote the two Terminator movies. I think he got an additional dialogue, is what James Cameron said. That's the credit he gets on the Terminator, additional dialogue, not screenwriting, but he got paid for it. He also co-wrote the novelization of the Terminator.
Yeah, I was going to say, we should mention Randall Frakes, who you brought up, but according to Cameron and Wisher, he was in and out of all of this too. He was the Roger Corman camera guy. He wrote the novelization with Wisher. He wrote the T2 novelization.
Yeah, and it was the three of them initially. I mean, they're the three who made Xenogenesis, together.
Yeah, and so like early talks of T2, you're going to talk about them holing up here in a second, but apparently Frakes was there at the beginning too, like kicking around ideas for the T1000 and like what the movie would be about, basically.
Yeah. I mean, he would go on to write Judge Dredd, the Stallone version of Judge Dredd.
Perfect.
He wrote The 13th Warrior. Remember that with Antonio Banderas?
You made him sound badass. Like we worked on building him up at first.
Yeah. I mean, he's still a working screenwriter. He also wrote the Exorcist prequel, which is not great, but but that you can't blame all of that on him either.
I remember actually liking The 13th Warrior for what it's worth.
I liked The 13th Warrior. It was based on a Michael Crichton book, Eaters of the Dead, which I enjoyed. And I liked it. He co-wrote Eraser, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Nice.
And where Schwarzenegger fights an alligator.
I was going to say the movie with the alligator. Schwarzenegger has like these pivotal scedes.
He also did an uncredited rewrite on Die Hard with a Vengeance, which is the second best Die Hard movie. I don't think it is a stretch to say. He also did a rewrite on Live Free or Die Hard, which is not the best.
Or the second best.
Or the second best. Not the worst. But it's not the worst. So there's that. Anyway, that's Bill Wisher. So where were we? Okay, Bill Wisher and James Cameron. They hole up in Cameron's small home office to work out the story beats on Terminator 2. And they decided during this, they're just like bouncing off each other. The way they described it is that they would, they had like one computer, one of them would sit there, the other one would like talk to them, they'd be bouncing ideas, then they'd switch and the other one would sit at the computer. That was just kind of an old school, like two screenwriters, old school Hollywood way of working on this. And they decided during this kind of brainstorming that Arnold's character from the first film would be a hero this time around. They weren't sure if people would love or hate this idea. At the time, the Terminator was considered one of like the greatest movie villains of all time. And they also had to convince Schwarzenegger himself, who was unsure about the move at first, but he eventually kind of gave in to their enthusiasm.
Arnold was iffy on being the good guy for sure. And we can talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, Cameron, a quote from him I found with about the setting up for this process. He says, as I got ready to write the screenplay, I kept asking myself, what's the real goal of this movie? Are we going to blow people away and get them all excited? Is that it? Or is there a way we can get them to really feel something? I thought it would be a real coup if we could get people to cry over a machine. If we could get people to cry for Arnold Schwarzenegger playing a robot, that would be terrific. That was the fun of the whole thing. It wasn't the chases, the special effects, all that stuff. Though I do get off on that on a day-to-day basis. I love sitting at the editing machine and making cuts and getting the action working. But when I look back, I think the real thrill was being able to control a response that was totally opposite from what we got the first time, and to just have fun with that, to play against expectations. You got to do that, especially in a sequel.
What a fun challenge to yourself as a writer, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just that Arnold is a good guy at everything at this point, too, is what, I don't know. Him being a good guy was like the thing in every interview I read was like, they're like, we're going to make people love this fucking machine.
Yeah.
And that was like their zero give point.
I mean, I don't know that Arnold played another villain until Batman and Robin, probably.
That may be right. Yeah.
I can't think of anything.
Sounds about right.
I can't think of any. I mean, that was only 6 years after this movie. Well, so they've established that they're going to make the T-800 their hero. So they had to move on to their villain next, the liquid metal T-1000, the second Terminator that Cameron had envisioned when working on his original outline for the first film. So the two, Wisher and Cameron, they kept throwing out ideas of what this character was capable of, what if he morphed into a knife or squeezed through prison bars. They're like, bouncing these ideas off of each other. And they were having a lot of fun. They were having a blast kind of playing off each other's creativity. And occasionally during this process, they would wonder if what they were writing was even possible to like put on film. So they would call up the folks at Industrial Light and Magic. They'd call up like Dennis Murin to ask, hey, we've got this idea where the T-1000 is going to like turn liquid and go through prison bars. Is that something you guys could do? And the answer was always yes, whether ILM knew how the hell they were actually going to pull it off or not. At one point,
why not, right?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, we'll figure it out. So at one point during the development, while Cameron was hammering out the details of how his villain would work, he actually met with his friend Stan Winston. Stan Winston had done the Terminator effects in the first. Well, he had worked on everything at this point that James Cameron had done. You guys don't need to know who Stan Winston is. So the two of them meet up. They're like at Cameron's apartment hanging out. He's telling him all these ideas because he's really excited about this idea for the T-1000. And he starts explaining the concept to him. He's liquid metal. He can turn into anything. He could turn into a person, a table, a knife blade. But Winston kind of raised a concern saying, I don't know who the bad guy is. I need a character, a specific image. To Winston, what Cameron was describing sounded like a blob made of goo, not like a villain. There's no character there. And Cameron respected Winston's opinion, and he respected his track record for creating iconic characters. So he started thinking about this. And then later in the evening, Stan Winston gets a phone call from James Cameron. James Cameron had an epiphany, and Cameron called Winston to tell him he's a cop. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make him look like a cop, like an LAPD officer. According
to Cameron, and he talked about some of this already, but he says, I started thinking about the film in two stages. In the first stage, the future sends back a mechanical guy, essentially what the Terminator became. Good guys send back their warrior. In the end, mechanical guys destroy. But up there in the future, somewhere, they say, well, wait a minute, that didn't work. What else do we have? And the answer is something terrible, something even they're afraid of, something they've created and they keep locked up, hidden away in a box, something they're terrified to unleash because even they don't know what the consequences will be, they being the machines, now in charge of the future. And that thing in the box becomes a total wild card. It could go anywhere, do anything. It's a polymorphic metal robot with nothing more than kind of a blob, like what you were just talking about. He said, I saw it as this mercury blob that could form into anything. Its powers were almost unlimited. And even in the future, they couldn't control it. He's like, writing that all down just scared me. Just sitting there writing that story scared me. And he's like, when we were there with Randy Frakes talking and asking, what could this be? The big question was always, who is the bad guy? When you've already created the ultimate badass, who could be a worthy adversary for Arnold Schwarzenegger? And it's like, you could do Sarah and John versus the Terminator again, but that doesn't move the ball down the field very far. We realized we had originally conceived the Terminator as a infiltration unit. It sneaks in and moves into places completely undetected and unnoticed. Obviously, Arnold upended all of that, but this gave us a chance to go back to a normal looking person. He's like, in an abstract sense, it's actually the same setup as the first movie. Michael Biehn's kind of shady and on edge. You don't know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy to start it all off. They say all that is said. They said it in the commentary. They're like, we played it like that, even though we knew deep down there's going to be a shit ton of interviews beforehand where people,
everyone knew
that Arnold is a good guy. But they said it actually worked out really well too, because they landed on cop. They're like, that guy can go anywhere. He can do anything.
He can ask questions without anyone wondering why he's asking questions.
Yep.
And right at the same time as they're filming, the Rodney King thing happened.
Yeah, like on it at a location where they filmed
across the street from the bar,
right?
The biker bar.
Yes.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, he said. He says in the commentary that literally they found out that the footage on that guy who filmed it's video camera right before the Rodney King beating is him filming them shooting the Terminator.
Yeah, you can see him in the background.
Out of town.
Yeah,
oh
wild.
Man,
it's wild.
But the cop turned out to be the perfect villain.
Yeah, obviously that part wasn't planned, unless there's some really nefarious shit going on behind the scenes.
Right, James Cameron plotted all.
Wait a minute, did James Cameron?
He's responsible for the beating of Rodney King in the LA riots.
You heard it here first, folks. Oh man,
he's still waiting for the right time to release the footage he shot during that.
And see, you guys were worried that I was going to get us canceled. Come on.
But changing the character to an LAPD officer underlined a central theme to the Terminator movies, as Cameron would note in later interviews. He said, this is a quote from Cameron: "The Terminator films are not really about the human race getting killed off by future machines. They're about us losing touch with our own humanity and becoming machines, which allows us to kill and brutalize each other. Cops think of all non-cops as less than they are: stupid, weak, and evil. They dehumanize the people they are sworn to protect and desensitize themselves in order to do their job." So I guess Cameron is team ACAB.
I was literally about to say, did you just turn this into an ACAB podcast? Come on now.
James Cameron did. I'm reading quotes.
But yeah, it did. The timing was impeccable, James Cameron. So.
Absolutely. Even if it was unintentional, it worked. It really worked. So after a few weeks, Cameron and Wisher had a 40 or 50 page treatment. They split it in half and each went to turn their half into a script. That initial draft ran about 140 pages and had a lot of scenes that would not make the final film, as early drafts often do. Cameron had actually wanted to finish the script before heading to the Cannes Film Festival that May. So Carol Co. would be announcing their slate of upcoming films at Cannes Film Festival. They had this big to-do, this big party, announcing all of their upcoming films, including Terminator 2. And he raced to the deadline and literally hit print on his computer as a limousine waited outside, ready to take him to Carol Co.'s private airplane that would take him to France. And it's like him and like Paul Verhoeven and like all these like big directors that Carol Co. was working in. And he's already like 20 minutes late, waiting on this thing. His printer was like jamming and stuff. So he's like running behind. So he walks on the plane. And he's just like, everyone like is looking at him like, this fucking guy. Like, who does he think he is? He's making us all late. But he walks on the plane, script in hand, and he actually handed Schwarzenegger the script on the plane, and Schwarzenegger read it on the plane to France, while James Cameron just like passed out because he'd been awake for 36 hours or something at this point trying to finish the script.
To quote Wisher, he said, they spent all of that time together, and they quote, we didn't split scenes up in the writing of Terminator 2 as happened in the Terminator. We wrote the T2 treatment out loud, side by side, taking turns typing. It was very specific and detailed. It was the whole movie. Then we cut it in half, spent a couple of weeks apart simply fleshing scenes out, Then we traded halves, rewrote each other, then came back together, went over all of it together, side by side. Apparently, this is a common process for both of them, by the way. They call it the scriptment.
I like that process. It sounds fun.
Yeah, you write a treatment and you just keep expanding on it until you get
until it becomes a screenplay. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Cameron was writing Point Break. He finished it right before this, and then the last 25 pages of the script were written like nonstop. And so it was just 36 hours of coffee and no sleep between the two. And Wisher says, yeah, like he literally printed it out right before stepping on the limousine. He said, for what it's worth, he said that Cameron had promised Karolko execs that he'd get them that script for a formal announcement at the Cannes Film Festival.
And from what Cameron says, like the story itself of Terminator 2 is about 50-50 him and Bill Wisher. They collaborated completely on that. But the final screenplay, like the dialogue and all that you hear in the film, is almost completely James Cameron. Like he basically, the shooting script, like all the details in the shooting script are mostly his work.
I think they had the idea of like where the story was going. Like when they talk about it, they're saying they would just like flesh out different parts of the story. Like basically like, why does this happen? He said that anytime one of us had an idea, we talk about it, then one of us sit down and write. Then we got tired, we trade places, continue typing. And he said, we gave every scene a separate file. We had a file for the nuclear blast scene, for Sarah's escape from the hospital, for the kid robbing the ATM machine, and so on. And we kept the hammer down. We just forced ourselves to produce ideas. Just make scenes is what we would say. And we just kept flowing. If it's shit, we'll throw it out later, until eventually they were just not sleeping anymore.
It honestly sounds like a good process for somebody who doesn't like the process of sitting down and writing a screenplay.
Right.
You know, it feels more collaborative, like you're bouncing ideas off a friend, which is it gets your like adrenaline going a little bit more. I can imagine. Yeah. And we know that James Cameron's an adrenaline junkie anyway. So.
Yeah. Right.
So he finishes this screenplay, at least this initial draft. He gives it to Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger reads it on the plane and he really likes it, but he's a little dubious about the idea of his character not getting to kill anyone. He's like, I'm the Terminator. I'm not killing anyone.
Cameron says that was always his problem with the thing. Yeah. It was not even just the good guy thing. It was that he doesn't kill people.
Yeah. And, he really had to convince him.
He said when they pitched him, they went to breakfast together and said that he was like the first person they had to work shit out with was Arnold. And they'd had this breakfast and they were confirming details. And he said he was iffy on being the good guy. But that was, like I said, Cameron and Wisher's like, no give. They're like, no, you're the good guy. This is the whole point of the movie. And we don't want to create a moral quandary. So you can't be killing people. That's not going to happen. And he's like, and it's just got to happen that way. And there's no compelling reason at the beginning of the movie for you not to kill people, but you're not going to kill people. Like you're just not. And he said when he had to break the news to him, he said the literal conversation was, okay, you don't kill anybody in this movie, but on the Terminator, that's what I do. He said, then Arnold starts trying to negotiate with him. Okay, fine. But I kill people until the boy tells me not to. And he said, no, Arnold, you do not kill people in this movie. I will kill one person. No, Arnold, this will be a terrible movie. No, it will not, Arnold.
I mean, I see where he's coming.
Come on, let me kill somebody.
You do kind of see where he's coming from. You almost, in the biker bar, it almost doesn't make sense for him not to kill anyone because he has no reason not to. Except, I guess they could have written that whoever he steals from is like a murderer or a criminal, like a bad guy, and make it a little more justified or something. And they don't really, I mean, the guys in the biker bar are not like good dudes, clearly, but we don't see any criminal acts from them, but if we had seen a criminal act, then you could almost justify it by saying, oh yeah, but he's just killing bad guys kind of thing. But
I love the idea of them sitting there though, and just having that conversation.
Yeah, right.
It's like, well, okay, after the kid tells me not to, I won't kill anybody. No, you don't kill anybody. Fine, I'll kill one person. And then it's like, no, Arnold, no.
No, you're not listening, Arnold. And I think that they're having this conversation in France at Cannes, like at breakfast one day. Yeah. Like after they've arrived there. He's still trying to convince them. So it did not take a lot of convincing to get Linda Hamilton back on board to play Sarah Connor. Cameron told her it's 12 years later, your son's a target and you're in a mental hospital. Like that was his selling point on that. And she was into it. So Hamilton herself was, she identified a lot with Sarah Connor because by the time Terminator 2 came around, she was a single mother. She had struggled with mood disorders and depression throughout her entire life. She was actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder a couple of years after Terminator 2. So she was able to kind of use her own experiences when playing the character. She was kind of able to access those parts of her past in order to play this version of Sarah Connor. Her biggest challenge, though, was the character's physical transformation. Cameron hired a guy named Uzi Gal, an ex-Israeli commando. He was hired to be her personal trainer and her weapons trainer.
Wasn't Uzi Gal a character in Planet Terror?
I don't know. I mean, there's a couple different actual people named Uzi Gal that I could find there. If you look up the gun, the Uzi, it's named after someone, an Israeli commando named Uzi Gal, but it's not, as far as I could find, the same guy, because I think this guy would have been too young.
Like a character.
I was totally making the joke, but that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It feels like a character off of The Boys.
Right.
Yeah. Brought back Uzi Gal. She's joined the 7.
But this is a guy, like the actual Uzi was named after someone named Uzi Gal, but I don't think it was the same guy. I couldn't find anything that said that they were the same person. Oh. Anyway, this guy, he has Hamilton working out for 3 hours a day, 6 days a week for 4 months to get in shape for this. And it's not just, I mean, a lot of it obviously is physically working out. I mean, you can tell by looking at her in the film, but it was also her weapons training. He was doing both. And for her weapons training, he had her strip and reassemble the 3 main weapons that she uses in the film in the dark repeatedly every single day, to where she could basically do it with her eyes closed. She could just feel it out. He would also he would throw tennis balls at her while she loaded her guns, training her to become incredibly precise in her movements. She was so precise, in fact, so this whole time she's doing weapons training, she's not actually shooting anything. She's just learning to move with precision. And it worked so well that when the first time that she went to a firing range, Uzi took her to a firing range and she emptied the gun. She was using a handgun, the one that she uses in the film. She empties the entire magazine into the target. And it's one of those targets that's like, like a silhouette of a dude. And every round landed right in the center of the target's torso. Nice. And she had never fired a gun before.
Wow.
But with live rounds. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's fucking nuts.
That's how intense his training was that it got her to that point.
Cameron says straight out that he thinks Hamilton's like the first female, like the first actress that he's ever seen completely do the physical transition like she did here for this movie. Everything about her has changed.
Yeah.
Which was important.
Even when she showed up on set and like Arnold saw her for the first time, Arnold's like, holy shit, you're buff. Like coming from Mr. Universe, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that's quite a compliment.
Yeah. and John and Sarah were like the huge parts of the movie. I mean, and then she's playing completely different character than what she was in the original movie,
she has changed a lot since then.
Yeah,
because of the circumstances of the first movie.
Right. Yeah. Like according to Wisher, he says we concluded that Sarah would have spent time with survivalists, possibly drug dealers, all manner of unsavory types to develop skills that she needed to protect John.
She becomes a doomsday prepper.
Yeah.
Because she knows that doomsday is actually coming and she knows the date.
Yeah. They had that's a great point, because like Cameron, when he talks about the characters being what drives him to be invested in the story, he said to him and Wisher sat down and they're like, okay. He said, quote, Sarah Connor was really interesting, especially in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and the time difference between Terminator and T2. I had to backfill those intervening 9 years. I had to find efficient ways of dramatically evoking what happened to her. The tricky part was having it all make sense to a member of the audience who didn't remember or hadn't seen the first Terminator. Basically, I had a character popping onto the screen in a certain way and therefore had to create a backstory for that character. He said it was fun because they tried to treat it like there was never the first movie. So they tried to write this movie as like, you can get everything you need from Terminator 2. You don't, what Todd said at the top of the show, like you don't have to have seen the original.
Right. I mean, even in her introduction, you've got Dr. Silberman talking to the other people that he's like touring around the facility. And he basically gives an entire like outline of the first film in like a 30-second conversation.
Yeah, he said you're talking about somebody who's encountered something that nobody else believes. So it's somebody just telling a story, like she's telling the story, And he says he likened it to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where Kevin McCarthy swears he's seen something shocking. Nobody believes him. Then he starts telling the story. In Terminator 2, she's locked up in a mental institution, and that raises the real question. Is she really crazy? The advantage of doing a sequel is that you can play games you can't play in the original. For example, I know the audience knows that the Terminator is real, so they're going to think she's crazy, or they're not going to think she's crazy. But the question still remains, but has she gone crazy? Has the past ordeal made her lose touch with reality? Mm-hmm. And he said what was disturbing for him is that later on, like, people would use this to be like, Sarah Connor's a role model for women. And he was like, nothing could be farther from the truth. I wanted people to invest in her emotionally, to feel sorry for her because she'd been through hell. But people were making this extrapolation, like a straight line from Ripley to Sarah Connor. And he's like, these are two very different characters. Ripley's been through trauma. She's had certain innate characteristics of leadership and wisdom under fire. She's a hero. Sarah's not a hero. She's warped and twisted.
She's a survivor.
But yeah, she's strengthened, but in a sad kind of way. The initial image I had of her was to have a big scar running down the side of her face. He said, and we did makeup tests with the scars, but it was just a nightmare to deal with that day to day. He's like, I wanted her to look like Tom Berenger in Platoon. And she was up for it. But the last thing she had done was playing Beauty and the Beast for 3 years.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And, he's like, but he was like, I thought it was a tribute to her as an actress that she could deal with this without any makeup whatsoever. And he said he always sees people talk about the physicality of what she was doing, but he says he doesn't think people know how to deal with like how dark and desolate and resourceful she was with the character. She got somebody, he complains like later interviews, just how many stupid interviews that she got set up for, just asking her about like, what was your workout regimen and what was this and this. And he's like, man, you're missing like how great and fucked up she is in this movie.
Yeah.
And he said that was like her only request. Like when he went to go talk to her, or when he called her to like bring her on the movie, he told her the details and she was like, okay, but I want to be real crazy. Like, I don't want to play it safe. Like, I want to be a nut job.
And she does. We probably also should not skip over the fact, while we're talking about Linda Hamilton, that Hamilton and Cameron had an affair during the filming of Terminator 2, which neither publicly acknowledged for years because Cameron was still married to Catherine Bigelow at the time. But as Gary mentioned earlier, they would, not long after the release of Terminator 2, or around the time of the release of Terminator 2, they moved in together. I don't think they ever got married, but they moved in together for a while, and they had a pretty long relationship. So as long as we're talking about, James Cameron's other relationships, we can't skip that one over.
Yeah. For whatever he says, James Cameron appreciated the physicality of her performance, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think that you do, to quote Joe Bob.
So with his returning stars on board, it was time to find actors to play his two new major characters. The teenage John, well, I put teenage in my notes, although I think he's supposed to be 10 years old in the movie, which does not come across as a 10-year-old, and the T-1000. So John Connor was going to be the toughest one to cast. This character had to convincingly look like the son of Linda Hamilton and Michael Biehn. He had to talk and act like a kid, and he had to show enough character for the audience to believe that he would grow up to be the leader of the human resistance. But he also had to come across as vulnerable enough to need the T-800's protection. That's a lot to ask of a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
So enter Molly Flynn. Molly Flynn has become like a legendary casting director, although she did not start casting movies until she was in her 50s, I believe. She was I think she was a theater teacher at a college somewhere before this. Yeah. So she's Cameron's casting director and would be for many, many years, starting with this film. But she did a nationwide search to try to find an actor to play John Connor, looking at hundreds of professional child actors. And no one was jumping out. And a lot of them had the same issue that like the kids that Cameron was looking at to play Newt and Aliens had, which that they all just acted like they were in cereal commercials. Like they would just smile all the time, and you can't have that when you've got this kid who's got a traumatic past and is running for his life for literally the entire movie is he's running for his life. So Molly Flynn goes out into the field. None of these like professional actors seemed to be working. And she started watching kids play at the Boys and Girls Club of Pasadena when a young 12-year-old kid named Edward Furlong caught her eye. There was just something about him that jumped out at her as being right for John Connor. And Furlong had some stuff in common with John Connor. He had never met his dad. He did not live with his mom. He was streetwise yet vulnerable. When Finn approached him, the kid snarled at her. He actually said, like, "What do you want, frog lips?" Something like that to her. Like, yeah. He thought he was getting in trouble for something because this adult that he doesn't know is coming up to him, But he dropped his guard when she asked if he'd like to audition for a movie. So he did. He auditions. The audition did not go great because he has never acted in his life. He was awkward, and he was intimidated by Hamilton because he read for the role with Hamilton. But he had this quality that Cameron liked, like this quality that made him seem real, And Cameron continued to audition other actors, but they all seemed kind of phony to him. They all had that kid actor quality to them that he did not want. And then Mally Finn had Edward Furlong work with a dialogue coach for a few weeks because, again, he's never acted. So he works with a dialogue coach for a few weeks. He comes back and auditions for Cameron again, and Cameron hires him there on the spot. Like there was just something about this kid, despite him being very inexperienced, that just felt right,
He never, you said he didn't know his dad. His mom had lost control of him. And so his aunt and uncle had sued for custody of him. There's a story Cameron tells about, apparently when she walked up to him to ask him, do you have any experience acting? He said, well, my uncle films our birthday parties. And I like the story, but John Connor was crucial for Cameron, the whole story. It was actually what propelled Cameron and Wisher when they were writing the whole thing, going back to the moral quandary stuff before in the direction they decided to go on this one. Cameron says that one thing that always got him is when he'd speak to people about the Terminator. He said from his experience, they'd always remember it fondly and talk about how cool Arnold was, spraying bullets everywhere. And well, as we know, that's not the point of the movie, but but it's probably a mix of everybody remembering that movie, but also everything else Arnold had, like
Commando
doing.
Yeah,
right.
But Cameron points out that there was this blurring of the distinction that this dude was the bad guy in that movie. I read a really cool series of interviews with Sid Field in The Art of Visual Storytelling, and Cameron says, this made me very nervous. I knew that the bad guy being the hero would get me into some pretty dangerous territory, morally and ethically. I absolutely refused to do another film where Arnold Schwarzenegger kicks in the door and shoots everybody in sight and walks away. I thought there must be a way to deflect this image of the bad guy as a hero and use what's great about the character. I didn't know what to do, but I thought the only way to deal with it would be to address the moral issues head on. And then we found out the key was this kid, because it's never really explained why John Connor has a strong moral fiber. He says, for me, John was pushed by the situation he sees when the Terminator almost shoots the guy in the parking lot. I think everybody invents their own moral code for themselves. And usually this happens in your teens based on what you've been taught, what you've seen in the world, what you've read, your own inherent makeup. So I started asking myself, what is it that makes us human? Part of what makes us human is our moral code. But what is it that distinguishes us from this hypothetical machine that looks and acts like a human but is not? He said that John Connor has got to be the key to that intuitively knows what's right, even if he can't articulate it. John says, you can't go around killing people. And the Terminator says, why not? And the kid's, he can't answer it. He just can't. He kind of gets into an ethical, philosophical question that could go on and on, but all he can say is, you just can't. Yeah. Like you said, he said, I thought the best way to deal with this was to not be coy about it and hope it slides by, but to tackle it head on and make the story about why you can't kill people. He says, so now we've got this character associated with being the quintessential killing machine. That's his purpose, devoid of emotion, remorse, any kind of human social code. He suddenly finds himself in the weirdest dilemma of his career. He can't kill anybody. He doesn't know why. He's got to figure it out. He's got to, because now he's kind of half human and he's dealing with a human that he's sworn to protect. And he figures it out at the end. The Tin Man gets a heart. He was like, once I clicked into that, I knew what the whole movie was. It was like that was it. And so I don't know. I just like that part of it with him talking about that with John Connor. So it was very crucial to him that whatever this kid did, that he be able to take the audience along that Arnold is, like Arnold's going to have to learn this because the kid is very certain that this is the moral way to be.
So for his villain, the T-1000, Cameron wanted a lean, agile actor, someone who would be a good contrast to Arnold. He said that if the T-800 was a kind of human Panzer tank, then the T-1000 had to be a Porsche, sleek, fast. Oddly enough, one person that Cameron was considering for the role early on was Billy Idol. And he even had concept art worked up that showed Idol in the T-1000's cop uniform. But then Idol broke his leg in a motorcycle accident. He was not able to do the film, so that was out the window. Ultimately, the part went to a little-known actor by the name of Robert Patrick. So
for what it's worth, he said they did toss around for a little while two Arnolds.
I think it would be too difficult, maybe.
I think that's
from a special
why they
effects
were like,
standpoint. That's why they kind of threw that out pretty quickly.
I think that's what Wisher said, was like they were just kind of like, nah, that's too much.
Yeah, but plus it doesn't give you that contrast. Like this is an upgrade. This new character, he's got to be sleek and a different version of this. So they give it to Robert Patrick. Before Terminator 2, Robert Patrick had appeared in a few small villain roles in various Roger Corman productions. His biggest role had been as a terrorist in Die Hard 2. He's one of like the lackeys, in Die Hard 2. But T2 would effectively launch his career, where he's mostly played villainous characters. Although he had, you guys probably know, a pretty a several year-long run on the X-Files as the replacement for David Duchovny's character on the show. But the role of the T-1000 was so iconic that he actually played it in 2 additional non-Terminator movies. So pop quiz for you guys. Do you know which movies those are?
Wayne's World 2 and
Wayne's World 1.
Oh, it was the first one?
It's the first
2.
One. Is it 2?
No, because he's going to get Tia Carrere.
Have you seen this boy? Wait, is it? Wait, maybe it is one.
It's the first one.
It's the first one. It is the first one. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
And Wayne's World 2.
No, I'm just kidding. Both Wayne's World movies.
I'm drawing a blank on the second
Last Action Hero.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he's
Very
in Last
cool.
Action Hero as well. So, which obviously is a fun little nod because of what Last Action Hero is.
Yeah.
Well, here's another fun fact for you: where the T-1000 first appears in the movie, it's under the same bridge that we'll see Jamie Lee Curtis meet Bill Paxton in True Lies.
Ah, really?
They just filmed the scene in the same spot.
Nice.
And here's another fact: Mally Finn can go and watch kids play at the Boys and Girls Clubs of Pasadena, but when I do it, I'm asked to leave, no matter what city I do it in.
That's because you're in a database.
Oh no, that's true.
So Robert Patrick went through a very different type of training for his role than Linda Hamilton did. His training focused on flexibility that would make his movements appear more fluid on camera, and he practiced sprinting, breathing only through his nose so that he would appear more robotic while running. Robert Patrick, I mean, you can't tell a lot in the movie because he's wearing the cop's uniform, except for in the scene where he's buck naked at the beginning, but he's very fit, but it's more of like a lean muscle. He was like a football and track star in college, in very good shape and very, very fast. There were some scenes like the scene where he's chasing John on the motorcycle. So Eddie Furlong is on a motorcycle, obviously not really riding it in that scene. He's where it's like a close up of him and the T-1000 is behind him. He's on the back of a truck, the motorcycle's attached, and Robert Patrick is chasing them out when they leave the mall, and he caught up with the truck. He was running so fast.
Oh, geez.
they had to tell the guy driving the truck to go faster because he caught up with him and he tagged Eddie Furlong on the shoulder.
That's got to be creepy. I don't even care if you're acting. Yeah. That's got to be kind of weird. You're
people over the years have been like, are they like speeding up the film to make you look like you're running faster? And they're not. Like, he's really running that fast. Robert Patrick is that fast in the movie. It's pretty wild.
I did want to bring up, that Cameron credits Robert Patrick a lot on helping to build the T-1000. He said he put in a lot of time. He said they went into an extensive audition process where they were literally building the T-1000. Literally, building it, like it
literally
exists, and
wow.
it's coming for you. No, but he said the first thing that stood out was how interesting he looked. But Patrick, when they went through this process, they were actually like creating different reasons, and Patrick had a lot of influence on that. Like, obviously the eerie smoothness of his emotions. My favorite was that that they developed this, like, he'll physically touch things.
Yeah, like scan them, like he's scanning them.
Because
and if you know that he's doing that, you can see him do it throughout the movie.
Yeah, they said that they obviously never discussed it, but the T-1000 would want to feel things because he'd have the ability to sense the molecular structure of the objects, and then he could replicate them later.
Yeah,
and the T-1000 is great, by the way. They loved the idea of the little guy who could beat the shit out of Arnold too. And how creepy it'd be to have him be experimental even for Skynet. And he mimics personalities and he's unkillable. But Cameron's scientific brain did make them, like, that was like, you know, we've gone through this every movie, but he's got limits because science. He said, quote, there had to be limits about his shape changing. Could he turn into a Coca-Cola machine? No, because he can't change mass. It certainly can't change its weight. Weight and mass are two physical constraints. It can become things, but it couldn't turn into a small dog because he's too big. There was too much mass, too much material. It can mimic weapons, but it can't mimic a weapon that could actually fire. A gun has moving parts. There's gunpowder inside a brass shell. So he can't make himself into that. So he said, okay, it can't make itself into a gun, but it could certainly make itself into a knife or something flat like linoleum. Knowing it could be a knife, we knew we had to show that once or twice because that's going to be cool. But we figured we could fit that into several different situations. He said, but then we would try to, like, stick to realism. We'd be writing a sequence, for example, like Sarah's escape from Pescadero, in which the T-1000 steps through the bars. But if he steps through them, it would be nice to let everybody know he's really stepping through them. So we get the gun caught in the bars. He has to reach down and adjust it to get through.
Yeah, I love that great attention to detail.
Yeah, that's such a great moment.
It's a great moment. It really is. It still holds up so well.
Yeah.
Robert Patrick's a Georgia boy. He's from Marietta, Georgia. Did you know that?
Hey.
Yeah. I mean, he moved around a lot before landing in Los Angeles. Also, another little fun fact about Robert Patrick: his younger brother Richard Patrick was the touring guitarist for Nine Inch Nails for a little while. Then he left Nine Inch Nails to form his own band, which is Filter. Like, hey man, nice shot, Filter.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's Robert Patrick's little brother.
How
about that? So anyway, the rest of the cast of Terminator 2 included Earl Bowen reprising his role of Dr. Silberman from the first film. We have Cameron regular Jeanette Goldstein as John's foster mother, Janelle, decidedly less buff than she was in Alien. I guess her bodybuilding
left Hispanic.
Less Hispanic, but much more white this time around. And Xander Berkeley, who I love Xander Berkeley. I love seeing him pop up in things, but he plays the foster father, Todd. Michael Biehn reprised his role of Kyle Reese in a dream sequence that was cut from the theatrical version of the film, but was later restored to the special edition. I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a bit. The only other, like, significant role in the film is the role of Miles Dyson, who played Joe Morton. Or played by Joe Morton, excuse me. Joe Morton is a great character actor. I really love anytime I see him pop up, even if it's in like a shitty DC superhero movie. But his first major role came in 1970 as the lead character in John Sayles' The Brother from Another Planet. But I love Joe Morton. I think it's because of this movie.
It 100% is this movie. Every time I see him, no matter what
Miles
other
Dyson.
thing I see him, I think of Miles Dyson. And I think of when he's, like, blowing up the building at the end.
His death scene in this is one of the greatest death scenes in movies, in my opinion. Like, because awesome. He's like, the way he's like hyperventilating, and then his breath slowly slows down until it stops, and then boom. What a great death scene. If you're gonna have a death scene in a movie, that's how to fucking do it. Honestly, that's great.
No, I always think of that every single time I see him in anything.
I love him.
Also Dr. Silverman. Cameron just seems like he's having a good time with that guy, with Earl Bowen. He the commentary calls him frustratingly smarmy. But he acts like he's just so fun for him.
So while we're on the subject of the cast, Todd, Any Star Trek alums this time around?
Yes, absolutely. Now, we've already covered Jeanette Goldstein and Earl Bowen's contributions to the Star Trek franchise. So instead, I'll begin with Mr. Joel Kramer, who plays an uncredited male nurse. He is actually the stunt coordinator, the LA unit for Star Trek Discovery on the pilot episode, The Vulcan Hello, and that was back in 2017. Then we got Denny Pierce, who's credited as burly attendant. There's a lot of burly people in this movie.
Burly attendant.
Yeah.
Is he the white or the black attendant?
I don't know. It doesn't say. That would have helped.
I mean, do you have a picture?
I don't. But he was actually a stunt actor on the Enterprise D. He's uncredited Enterprise D crewman on Star Trek Generations in 1994. And then he also did some stunt work for Star Trek Into Darkness. That's the J.J. Abrams Kelvin timeline. That was in 2013. Then we got Terrence Evans, the tanker truck driver. He's got a couple of episodes of Star Trek Deep Space
Another
Nine.
stunt performer, I assume.
No, this one's actually
okay.
got some
because he just
credit.
basically gets like thrown out of a truck in this movie.
Yeah. But he was in season 1, episode 14, Progress from 1993 as a character named Baltram, and season 2, episode 5, Cardassians, and he played a character named Proka. And then he was also in an episode of Star Trek Voyager. The episode was called Nemesis. It was in 1997. He played Ambassador Treen. And then we've got Abdul Salam El Razik. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. He plays Gibbons, the guard that they find duct taped to the toilet there at Cyberdyne. He was actually in Star Trek Next Generation season 1, episode 14, 1100101 from 1988 as a bass player. I think that was probably a holodeck.
Holy
scene
shit.
that he,
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
I like to think this is the wild, weird feature that really sets us apart.
Yeah.
It's like, what the fuck?
Trust me, there's plenty more. Hang on. We got Mr. Jim Palmer as Jock number 1. I believe he is the one who calls Edward Furlong a dipshit.
calling moi a dipshit.
Exactly. He actually did some stunt work in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek in 2009. And then we've got Castulo Guerrera, who plays Enrique. He did an episode of Next Gen, season 3, episode 8, The Price from 1989. He played a character named Seth Mendoza. And then we've got Mr. Edward Furlong, who, yeah. Now it's not official canon, but he was in 2 episodes of Star Trek Renegades as a character known as Fixer.
What's Star Trek Renegades?
It was basically it was an online show that didn't last very long.
Was it official? Not a fan thing?
I think I think it's regarded as one of the closest fan-made productions. Like the 2 episodes that Eddie appeared in were the pilot episode and the season 2 premiere, and both of those were actually directed by Tim Russ, aka Lieutenant Tuvok from Star Trek Voyager. So like they got some people involved, and if you go through some of the episode cast lists, you'll see like, oh, I know who that is, and I know who that is too. And then this was the big surprise for me. A lot of people forget Nikki Cox, the quintessential 90s pretty girl from
so hot. Not in this. She's way too young for me.
Yeah, she's way too young, but this was like one of her early.
Well, what was that like sitcom she was in where Bobcat Goldthwait played a rabbit?
Yeah, Unhappily Ever After.
Oh,
yeah.
She was so hot in that.
But she actually, before Terminator 2, she was on Star Trek The Next Generation, season 2, episode 15, Pen Pals, where she plays the little girl Sarjenka, who ends up communicating with Data back and forth, and she kind of bonds with Data.
She has one line in this, and she narcs John out to the cops.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's everybody on Star Trek.
No Dean Norris. I'm surprised Dean Norris never appeared in Dean Norris, Hank from Breaking Bad. He's the SWAT
well,
team guy
I've got some additional casting nuggets because I went through everybody.
Yeah, Dean Norris, who also is in Total Recall. He's one of the mutants, but I don't think you could even see his face in this. But I still knew it was him immediately.
Yeah,
like he should have been. What was it? Starship Troopers too.
Starship Troopers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Total Recall. Yeah.
For things.
Yeah. He's around. Cool. Well, thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
So the T-1000, the character was created with a blend of CG techniques and makeup and puppetry. Dennis Muren, we mentioned him earlier. He had supervised ILM's groundbreaking work on The Abyss. He was back to supervise the CGI on Terminator 2. So working from photos of Robert Patrick, and ILM built 3D models of the actor in their computers. They would scan his face and everything. They would duplicate his movements. Even like he had a slight limp from an old football injury, and they actually incorporated that into their computer, I guess, their files on him. Wow. Like, so when you see the T-1000 move in completely CGI form, he does have a slight limp, which is pretty fun. For the scenes where the T-1000 changes from one form to another, ILM used a technology called morphing that they had developed in Ron Howard's Willow a few years earlier. So it was used in Willow. There's a character, if I remember correctly, that changes to like a goat and like other characters in Willow. You guys might remember that. And it didn't really take off after that because Willow did not do very well at the box office. But shit, after Terminator 2, you saw morphing everywhere. It was in like the Michael Jackson Black or White video. It's in like The Mask, I think is probably the biggest, the Jim Carrey movie, The Mask.
Oh, yeah.
Probably one of the biggest examples, but you saw it everywhere, like commercials, movies, everything. After this, everyone was morphing things.
Morbin time. Oh, morphing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Had to get the Morbius joke in.
Got to get a Morbius joke in there. That's going to be that's what you call an evergreen joke.
Yeah, that's an evergreen joke. People will always appreciate.
That's going to be really funny a year from now. So some of the poses that they tried to put the digital T-1000 in were too difficult for ILM's computers. So they actually had to bring in scientists to help them with the math that was required to pull the effects off. Eventually, they were able to do so in part because of a piece of new software invented by an ILM employee named John Knoll and his brother Thomas. That software was actually an early version of Photoshop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Nice.
John Knoll, by the way, he had been a CG supervisor on The Abyss, working under Dennis Muren. He's gone on to become one of the industry's most sought after visual effects guys. He's worked on everything from the Star Wars prequels and the Star Wars special editions that came out like in the mid 90s, to Pirates of the Caribbean, to the Harry Potter movies, to the Mission Impossible movies, and Todd, Star Trek.
Ooh.
Early in his career, he was a motion control camera operator on The Next Generation and on Star Trek 4. And then he later worked as the visual effects supervisor on Star Trek Generations and First Contact.
Very cool. Nice.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
So Cameron was he was a little nervous about what ILM could do, despite their reassurances. After all, if the water tentacle scene in The Abyss had not worked, he could have just cut the scene out completely, and the movie would have been fine without it.
Yeah.
If the T-1000 didn't work, though, he couldn't make the movie. He couldn't make Terminator 2. Like, the T-1000 has to work. But when he saw an early proof of concept shot of the T-1000 walking out of an explosion with the fire reflected off of its sleek chrome body, he knew that it was going to work. It looked just exactly like he had envisioned it.
Nice.
And overall, ILM's budget on Terminator 2 was $6 million, which was astronomical at the time for a special effects budget. And to put it in context, that's the same amount as the entire budget of the first Terminator movie.
Wow.
Was just used on special effects for this.
It's pretty insane. The thing with the T-1000 is like, you've heard of the uncanny valley, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a difficult thing they're working here with too, that you kind of mentioned, like certain poses and everything. It's like this human motion animation. Mm-hmm. I think they also call it like deep motion. It's tough because like your brain inherently just knows what's right or not right about a real person moving or walking or talking or whatever. Just built in, the one thing you know more than anything is what a human being looks like. So mathematically simulating human motion from scratch is insanely difficult.
Yeah.
And that's where they have to start. And I'm just saying that because there's all this beauty in the effects here, but especially at the time, this was tough as shit. And that's before you get Cameron's ultra detailed ass involved and everything.
Right.
A quote from him on it was, he says, the start point in CGI is always the final form. I wanted the effect of the T-1000 to look like a spoon going into hot fudge. It dimples down, then flows up, over, and closes. That's the look I wanted. You have to work with the viscosity in order to get that look just right. You have to figure out what the closure looks like. Does the color come back immediately, or is there a lag time between where the surface forms and then the color forms after that? We had to create a visual language for this guy. For example, when he forms up from his chrome shape, does he form up with the colors of his uniform and skin and all those things simultaneously? I finally chose to have him assume the absolute finished form in a liquid chrome and then have the color of the uniform be the last thing added. We emphasized the idea that the T-1000 was mimetic, that it was a camouflage technique in the way a chameleon would imitate a color it's sitting on, which is why we made up a name for him, a mimetic polyalloy, the ultimate chameleon.
Yeah, and I think that's I love that he puts that much thought into it. That makes me think of the scene where he is disguised as the floor, the checkerboard floor in the mental institution, and when he comes up, he still has a little bit of that checkerboard on his face for a moment. You know, like it's really cool.
Yeah.
Gary, you mentioned the uncanny valley, and it made me think of this like tweet that I saw a while back where it says like one of the most frightening things I ever heard is when someone pointed out that the existence of the uncanny valley implies that at some point there was an evolutionary reason to be afraid of something that looked human but wasn't.
Right. I have seen that too. Yeah, that's pretty wild. Like there's something about it that's like it's just not quite right. It
not quite right.
Out.
Yeah.
So like cavemen were running from something that
was
like, no, not real. Not real.
That looks mostly like us, but isn't. So a lot of the talk around Terminator 2's effects centered around the groundbreaking work that ILM was doing with CGI, and with good reason. But people forget how much of Stan Winston's work appears on screen. There are about 15 minutes of screen time where the T-1000 displays its morphing and healing abilities, but only about 6 of those minutes were purely CG. The other 9 were achieved with the use of prosthetics and puppets created by Stan Winston Studios.
It's practically seamless.
It is. I mean, that
looks great.
Yeah.
I almost don't, like you said earlier, you don't need to know who Stan Winston is. I almost get sick of him. I almost want to be like, Stan Winston, you want to be the best at fucking everything? Why don't you just, this is the price you pay. We no longer want to talk about you anymore.
Everyone knows who you are.
We just expect that you, okay, Stan Winston.
If you're interested in this kind of stuff we talk about in this show, you know who Stan Winston is.
Yeah.
But I agree. It is seamless because of the blending of practical and CGI. I think it's the same reason I think that Jurassic Park holds up as well as it does, and which again is Stan Winston. There's something about using CGI as needed and then supplementing practical effects with CGI. And then this Terminator 2 was really the first time that physical and digital effects were used symbiotically like this. This had never really been done before. Scenes were often split between ILM and Winston. For instance, if the T-1000 gets shot with a bullet, Winston's prosthetics would show the bullet hitting the T-1000's chest, and ILM would then close the wounds digitally. You see this in the first confrontation with Arnold and Robert Patrick in the mall, when he starts shooting him in the back hallways. A lot of the effects that people assume were CGI are actually from Winston's crew in this.
Wow.
Winston's crew created several foam rubber puppets of Robert Patrick to show the T-1000 in various stages of battle. There was the Pretzel Man. That's the one that's where the T-1000's body is splayed open after being shot there towards the end. There's the Donut Head puppet where he's got the big hole in his head. The Splash Head, whereas
I was going to mention, like, if you go to stanwinstonschool.com, there's detailed like processes like photographed of like them doing this, and this would be great for us to put on social media. I blame me as much as anyone. This is like cool stuff. You can actually see that, like,
the Stan Winston Studio website is an outstanding resource. It is they document like everything, and it's really great. It's a really great website.
The Splash Head blows my mind because I had no idea. Like I just thought there's no way, but like that's a puppet. Made that shit.
Yeah, that's a puppet. And plus all of the like the finger knife on the security guard, Jeanette Goldstein's knife or sword arm killing the foster father. That was a prosthetic. That's all practical. Xander Berkeley actually said he had to practice like sword swallowing techniques for a couple of weeks because they had to put that sword in his mouth far enough back to where it looked real. And then, of course, there's a prosthetic on the back of his head where it projects. But Gary's mom's would have actually been really good in that role, I think.
There it is.
This is a fun battle we have every week.
The score is tied up, gentlemen, 1-1.
It really helps when you don't have a gag reflex, though.
Yeah. I think the real sad part of all this is like how much our moms could probably make on OnlyFans now, thanks to us, and they're not taking advantage.
Oh man. So one of the most subtle and ingenious effects in the film, once I figured out how they did this, I was like, it kind of blew my mind because it's a small effect that you don't think about as much, but it's the splatters of liquid metal we see when the T-1000 gets hit with a bullet, which you see several times throughout the film. So the effects artists would shoot, they shot pellets into mud and then kind of studied the impressions that they made, the little splatter that they would make. And then they sculpted those forms and fit them with a spring-loaded mechanism that would snap open the bullet wound on cue. So the wounds were attached to a fiberglass chest plate that Robert Patrick wore under a costume that had pre-scored holes in it. So when he would get shot, a puppeteer off screen would click a button and it would burst out of his uniform. Nice. So you would think that was CG because you see it burst open on screen, but it's 100% practical. Which is really rad, I think.
I thought I caught there was at one point he turns and he's moving, and I thought his chest looked a little thicker than it did in the previous shot. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. There are so many things that go into the thought of these things that I don't know that I would an example I'm thinking of right off the top of my head that would I have thought of this were it my job to think of this stuff is it's like when the Terminator's walking up into the bar and you see from his point of view. And I think they do this in the first one too, but it's scanning things and doing all of this. And they call it thermovision. Cameron says in the commentary, he says, because
they could have come up with a better name.
He said, quote, in the thing, he's like, we call that thermovision because we're clever that way. but he points out, he's like, we just made this up. I don't know. This is just a way for you to see what the Terminator sees, which is really not how the Terminator will see, because the Terminator is a fucking computer, and
there's no reason for the Terminator to have there's no reason for there to be words on the screen.
Right. It's like
purely
the
for the
does
audience.
Not process information this way. It's just, but somehow it translates to you that you're like, oh, I'm seeing the Terminator's vision.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. Is would I think of that? I don't know. It's weird. It's you just accept it, but it's kind of, it's intriguing to me.
Yeah. I actually thought about that watching it this time, or maybe it was while I was watching the first Terminator. I was like, a computer wouldn't really need to have visual cues like that, but it does. Obviously the audience does need visual cues, right? Because we're not computers. So while it was not nearly as brutal as the shoot for The Abyss, the shoot for Terminator 2 was still a pretty tough one. With a release date set, the crew had 12 months from shooting script to release date. And so in the course of 1 year, they had to shoot some of the most ambitious action sequences ever committed to film and deliver special effects, the likes of which had never been attempted before. That's a huge undertaking for a movie of this size. And the truncated pre-production schedule meant that Cameron and his crew didn't have the time to prepare as well as they had wanted. There was no time to properly test practical effects before filming. If the effects didn't work, they were just going to have to figure out a way to work around them on the day.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Cameron's scrappy days working for Roger Corman probably came in handy a lot during those moments. 100%. So the shoot began in October of 1990 in the Palmdale Desert and continued all over parts of California until April of 1991. And it was a pretty tough shoot for everyone involved. And James Cameron, once again, was uncompromising in his vision. He had a short temper. He was highly demanding of both his cast and crew. The crew actually had T-shirts made that said, "You can't scare me. I work for James Cameron." There are some of the conversations, and I actually think Schwarzenegger said this in an oral history of this that I read, which is on the Ringer's website, by the way. If you want to read a good oral history of the making of Terminator 2, the Ringer published a pretty good one a couple years ago. But Schwarzenegger even talks about it a little bit, where he's like, James he very much knows his vision and what he wants, but he's not the best at communicating that necessarily to everyone. Like sometimes it's almost like he expects everyone to know what is in his brain without him having to explain it, which is not the best trait in a director. Probably I think some of the best directors are the ones who are able to communicate their ideas to their crew.
Yep.
Not that James Cameron's not a great director, but he's probably not a great director to work for. Schwarzenegger and Hamilton, who at this point were old friends of Cameron, especially Schwarzenegger, like him and James Cameron were like, they'd ride motorcycles together on the weekends and stuff. Like they were buddies, they'd smoke cigars together. But they became frustrated with how many takes Cameron was having them shoot. He reportedly shot for 5 days just getting close-ups of Linda Hamilton in Miles Dyson's home. To get what he wanted, it's a highly emotional scene, and I get that he wanted it to convey that. But yeah, that from an actor, that's incredibly frustrating.
I actually found an interview from this time where somebody asked Cameron about how hard he is on the crew, and he says he realizes and admits that he is, quote, very, very hard on his crews, and he says, "I don't apologize." And his quote here says, "If an NFL coach didn't browbeat the guys and say, 'You fucked up and you didn't do this,' I mean, it's perfectly acceptable in sports that mistakes and laziness are not tolerated. If you're working on a big movie, it must imply that you're the best. You presented yourself as a varsity athlete. Fucking be one. That's my philosophy." And they asked him, was like, "So do you end up firing a lot of people?" And he said he laughed and said, "I would never do anything as merciful as firing someone. For fucking up, you stay till the end."
I mean, honestly, he's got a point. You're spending $100 million on a movie. Like, you got to get it right, and whatever it takes. I mean, I'm not saying like abuse people, but like yelling at people or whatever, if that's what it takes to get them to do the job. Like, I wouldn't want to work for him. But I understand where he's coming from.
It's weird. Like I mentioned Mike Cameron earlier, his brother. And it's like this with some people, like even Schwarzenegger, like you mentioned, like some people try to be like, they care about him and they're still like a little defensive of him. Mike Cameron, I found a quote where he says, "I've been the recipient of a lot of his derogatory remarks, and it does hurt your feelings, but he's really a big-hearted guy. The people who are close to him know that, and they just kind of tolerate the viciousness. Maybe the reason they're so willing to forgive is that, as everyone says, it's never personal." Mike Cameron says his movies have an ego, and you don't fuck with his movies. Michael Bean says he doesn't have an ego. When he throws a tantrum, it's almost like the movie is throwing a tantrum. I just thought those were interesting things. I don't know.
When you're working on a movie like this, like everything has to be right. And of course, James Cameron is a bit of a perfectionist, but there's also a lot of moving parts on this. There's a lot of dangerous stuff going on. There's a lot of stuff that, like, if one thing goes wrong, 100 other things are going to go wrong.
Well, we saw that on The Abyss when he almost died of like, okay, so you were in charge of that, you're fired. You're in charge of that, you're fired.
Yeah, and nobody can doubt his commitment, to it, because he's putting himself in dangerous situations. He's always said, like, he's not going to ask anyone on his crew to do something that he would not be willing to do. Speaking of which, though, one of the more dangerous action sequences on the film, which is the chase scene from the film's first act, where the T-1000, it starts at the mall, and then the T-1000 chases John on his little dirt bike through the San Fernando Valley, flood channels, the LA River. In this scene, the T-1000 is in a big tractor trailer. Schwarzenegger, Furlong are on this little, it starts off with, I guess, John on his little motorbike. Then Schwarzenegger comes around and puts him on the motorcycle.
Yeah.
So this was obviously a very, very dangerous thing to shoot. And while the crew was preparing to film the sequence, they actually realized that their truck was too tall to fit under some of the bridges that it had to pass under. So instead of changing locations, Cameron actually comes up with the idea to just work it into the story. The truck, they pre-scored the truck so that when it went under one of those overpasses, the top would just slice off, and it would basically spend the rest of the chase scene as a convertible.
Nice.
So yeah, it's pretty cool. And so, as with most of the stunt heavy action sequences, several cameras were used to film the sequence, including one that was held by Cameron himself from a motorcycle sidecar. So during this chase sequence, he's in a sidecar. He's like 4 inches from the ground, during this. I mean, if you've ever seen a motorcycle sidecar, it's very, very low, and and they're going pretty fast, and he's holding the camera because, again, he's going to put himself in the middle of it.
100%.
Yeah. And another difficult sequence was actually the final chase scene, which took place on a 5-mile stretch of highway in San Pedro. To film this sequence, the production had to shut down the highway every night for 2 weeks. And this is all at night, that last sequence. It's on the way to, the steel factory. So before shooting this scene, the production's cabling was stolen, and the producers had less than 24 hours to find enough replacement gear to light 5 miles of road. And then they had to hire guards to guard it when they weren't there so that nobody would steal it again. Some nights they couldn't shoot due to the rain. So they had to shoot some of the footage of Schwarzenegger, Hamilton, and Furlong in the SWAT van using what's called the poor man's process. This is an old school way of shooting car sequences where basically they just park the car under an overpass while a bunch of grips rocked it back and forth from the outside, and the lighting and effects crew would sweep spotlights over it and squibs to kind of give the illusion of motion. Which again, that's I feel like that's the Roger Corman stuff kind of coming
right.
Oh, very much. Yeah.
And Cameron, he is notoriously hands-on on his movies. We've talked about this on probably every episode so far, where he is not afraid to get in there and hold a camera or paint a piece of the set or do whatever it takes to get it done. Like he's any job on the set he could probably do, and he will do it if he needs to. And I mentioned before that, he held the camera in that sequence on where he was in the motorcycle sidecar. And it's not unusual for a director to hold a camera for certain scenes, but Cameron would pride himself on getting shots that no other camera operators would get, or that shots that other camera operators thought were too dangerous. One of those shots was during the freeway sequence in this last chase scene, where Cameron wanted his Steadicam operator to follow the T-1000's helicopter as it flew under an overpass. His Steadicam operator, a guy named Jimmy Bureau, who he had also worked with Cameron on The Abyss, he refused. He's like, I am not shooting that with that helicopter flying that close to me under an overpass that it could very easily crash into and kill us all. So Cameron was like, okay, he was undeterred, and he's like, well, I'll do it. So Cameron actually shot that scene himself, like the scene, which is one of the most dangerous stunts I can think of in a movie.
Like not just that. Like I even was reading an interview with Arnold where he says, like, he was talking about, despite how tech heavy the nature of the movie is, he was saying, Schwarzenegger was saying that he worked harder than he's ever seen on emotions. Like that Cameron was like, this leads into it because he was saying, he was like, he worked hard. He talked us through it more, insisted on rehearsing our reactions. And then he was still doing whatever to get whatever shot he wanted. He was like, we'd be working on like emotions 1 second. And then all of a sudden there's the scene where the helicopter flies below the underpass, and he saw what the plan was. And he's like, this has to be done twice. So we get the forward and rear angles, and then I'll do it.
Yeah. It's insane. Even watching it now, like I watched it again this morning, and that entire sequence is incredible because the helicopter goes under, then it goes over another bridge later on, and it does it in a way where like
it cuts it pretty close.
It cuts it really close.
Yeah.
Like it's like the helicopter pilot pulled up at just the right moment, or he was going to crash into that thing.
Yeah.
It's pretty rad.
It's fucking insane. But I also literally found an interview with Bill Paxton around this time talking about Cameron and shooting video. And Bill Paxton tells a story in one interview where he says that he went on a plane ride with Cameron, like where Cameron's piloting. And he said he was tying a camera to the wings of the ultralight plane that they were on. And he said, and in the middle of the flight, he undid his seatbelt so he could get a better grip. And he said he turned the plane straight down, like Bill Paxton said he was in the plane with his camera's like, no, we gotta I want to do this. I want to see what I can do. And he said he like put the camera on the wing of the plane and was like holding it out. And like the plane is pointed straight down. And he said, quote, he goes into a 3,000-foot dive and drops 3 feet off the deck. And I go, oh my God, what the fuck? And he said he pulls up just in time. And
Wow.
he said he was like, if we'd have gone like another foot, game over, man. I added that part.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Gary.
He does say, quote, if you're gonna hang out with Jim Cameron, you better have life insurance.
Yeah. Wow.
But for all of that too, by the way, and I know you're gonna get into this with like post-production, but I was reading this whole thing about how like Carolco or Carolco,
it's Carolco according to everyone that I've heard say it. I didn't know for years how to say it until I was watching behind the scenes on this, and it's apparently Carolco.
Carolco. So around this time somewhere, they're starting in the the $70 million range on their budget, and they apparently went to Arnold Schwarzenegger for support. I don't know if you saw this. Like they were like, you got to tell him to pull back.
I didn't see this. No.
And he said that they would come to him and be like, we need your support in toning this back. And he would say, no fucking way. Like, I'm not doing it. And he said, then they'd come back to me like, all right, one sequence. Let's stop him from this or something. And he said it was like literally, he was like, let's cut out. Or he said he would get notes from them, and so he was not supportive of them because that's what it was. It was he was not supportive of them because he knew their vision wasn't right. Because then they would come to him and be like, "We need your backing because we're going to cut this scene." And he'd be like, "What scene is it?" And it was like, and he said they'd show it to him, and it's like the Roadhouse scene where the character's introduced. And he's like, and he said he had to like write them back and be like, only a fucking studio guy would cut out that scene.
Yeah.
He's like, I mean, you do not have my support. And he's like, just let him do what he's doing.
So I guess since we're talking about like the these crazy stunts, we probably need to talk about Terminator 2 stunt performers. These guys, they get overshadowed a lot. We talk about the guys like Dennis Buren and Stan Winston, but you've got to acknowledge the stunt performers, because that helicopter sequence we're talking about, a guy put his life on the line to do that,
Yeah.
The stunt coordinator here was Gary Davis. Gary Davis, been around for a long time. T2 is probably the biggest thing that he ever worked on. I mean, hell, everyone who worked on this could probably say Terminator 2 is the biggest thing he ever worked on.
Right.
But his career goes back to the early 70s, where he worked on films like Race with the Devil. He later worked on Smokey and the Bandit 2, The Lost Boys, Roadhouse, Predator 2. After Terminator 2, he worked on films like Speed, Independence Day, Escape from LA. So he's done a lot of stuff. And then you've got Peter Kent. Peter Kent is Arnold's stunt double on this. This is the guy who, when you see the motorcycle chase at the beginning of the film, that great jump into the LA River, which is an insane stunt to do on a motorcycle. That's Peter Kent. Peter Kent's the guy on the motor. He's the guy doing all those big stunts for Arnold. And you can tell it's not Arnold if you're really looking for it.
Yeah.
But he looks a lot like him, honestly. But he also, he's doubled for Arnold in a lot of stuff, including Terminator 2 3D Battle Across Time from like Universal Studios,
Oh yeah.
And he also did it in the remember the Terminator 2 arcade game?
Oh yeah, I love that game.
He played the T-800 in that. It's not actually Arnold doing it; it's Peter Kent.
Oh,
so,
weird.
I can't let this episode go by without acknowledging these guys, because we always try to acknowledge guys like the stunt performers, the even the costume designer, production designers, people that are in the positions, the the jobs on films that don't get talked about as much. But stunt performers literally put their lives on the line.
Can I shout out one more stunt performer?
Yeah,
actually.
please do.
So I ran across this guy while I was doing Who Am I Trekking With, and his name is Mick Rogers, and he plays uncredited policeman. But he was the winner of a Technical Achievement Award at the 2002 Oscars for the concept, design, and realization of the Mick rig. And he shared that with Matt Sweeney. He's also the winner of SAG's Outstanding Action Performance by a Stunt Ensemble in a Motion Picture for Hacksaw Ridge in 2016, and was nominated for SAG's
Mel Gibson, not Clint Eastwood.
Hacksaw Ridge?
Hacksaw Ridge.
Wasn't that Mel Gibson? With Andrew Garfield, right?
Yeah, it's the one with Andrew Garfield.
Yeah. That's Mel Gibson.
What was I thinking of?
I don't know. Heartbreak Ridge?
Probably.
But he was also nominated for SAG's Outstanding Performance by a Stunt Ensemble in a Motion Picture for Iron Man as well back in 2008.
Oh, very cool.
And he also won the Taurus Award at the 2002 World Stunt Awards for Best Stunt Coordinator and or Second Unit Director for the feature film. And I thought you would enjoy this, Gary and Justin, for the feature film The Fast and the Furious in 2001.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
the beginning of the world's greatest movie franchise.
Yeah,
exactly.
There you go.
Exactly. Man. Well, one day we'll do a Fast and the Furious series.
The whole series.
Oh, it's
I think we should.
Yeah.
I think we should just do a series on that.
If
If there's
you guys-
ever a
if you
movie
guys-
franchise that deserves this, sway like moving away from directors for a minute to talk about just the franchise of a film series.
Absolutely.
Fast and Furious.
I agree.
You guys
I'm
were
with you.
kind enough to cover the Batman trilogy for me, so we have to do Fast and
We got to
Furious
wait
for
till
sure.
all 11 of them are out, and then we will spend half a year on the Fast and Furious franchise.
God,
For
yeah,
what it's worth,
yeah,
I
we take that
also
one.
am in full support of our first like complete actor series to just be Vin Diesel, but that's a whole topic.
So, as usual on a James Cameron film, once Terminator 2 entered the editing phase, he had even more battles to be fought. Once again, as it had been on The Abyss, the ending of Terminator 2 was an issue. The original ending of Terminator 2 cut to many years in the future, where we see Linda Hamilton in old age makeup having prevented Judgment Day. She watches as John, who is now a senator. He plays on the playground with his daughter. Now, I'm sure Gary will be glad to point out that this scene makes no goddamn logical sense, because if Sarah prevented the war, then how did she meet Kyle Reese? How was John born? This scene,
Man,
I'm
I'm just trying to have a good time and pretend any of this makes sense. But I will throw this in there from one of the commentaries with Cameron. I know exactly why he did this, because he says in passing in something I saw that he admits he likes to show people at different stages in their life because it makes it feel more epic. Like, that's literally what he said. He was just like, it just makes it feel more epic when you show people like this impacting their whole life. So like, it was in the commentary, because he talks about showing in T2, showing John Connor at the beginning of the movie.
Sure, yeah,
like,
which
in
I'm
the
fine with
war. Yeah, and so he even says like, well, so like Titanic, not that I've seen it, but he's like Titanic, you got the bookends with the old lady.
Sure.
He's like, it just makes it feel more epic to have like the story resonate throughout generations.
I mean, I guess I get that, but this ending, I actually watched the director's cut today, or the special edition, whatever you want to call it. And I thought that this scene had been restored in the director's cut, but the version that I rented today had all the other scenes that had been restored, but this was not in there. But I was able to watch it on YouTube, and I'd seen it before many times in the past. And it feels, the fact that it's not even on the director's cut that's been released, at least not the one that I rented on Vudu today, makes me think that even Cameron realized that it didn't quite work, because it's very it feels very tonally different from the rest of the film, much like the wave sequence in The Abyss, how it feels like it's from a different movie. It's just very weird from a tone standpoint. Like you get like whiplash because
very much,
and the fashions of the people and the future fashions of the people are really goofy in that scene. But also you've got like Sarah Connor, who is just a fucking warrior, and now she's just like a grandma. sitting on a bench. Like it's a very weird. It's a very weird way to end the movie.
And I think for as much as they spent, time wise and financially to make the T-1000 look as good as it does, that old age makeup on Linda Hamilton is terrible.
Old age makeup's really hard to do, though.
Tough. Yeah.
It's really hard to do because you know what the person looks like and you inherently know that they're under makeup.
Right.
So like it's very, very difficult to do old age makeup. No old age makeup will ever be as bad as Guy Pearce in Prometheus. That is the worst old age makeup I've ever seen.
That's fair.
I will say this too, for what it's worth. I mean, if there was ever a character in a film series that's not going to make it to grandma level, it's Sarah Connor.
Right.
The fucking nut job who like goes all in, like starting war.
And then in Terminator 3, they established that she died in 1997, I believe. Although she comes back in Terminator Dark Fate, and I don't recall how that actually happened.
I haven't seen any of those. So I
haven't seen Terminator 3?
No, when it came out in theaters, and I have never seen Dark Fate. I've never I don't recall.
Yeah, I don't remember how they explained that because I've only seen it the one
I
time.
saw Salvation when it came out in theaters, and then I just stopped. So
yeah, that's probably a good call. After seeing Salvation, I would have stopped too. But
we can talk about the sequels at the end of this, but I don't know much about them. So I can't tell you much beyond 2.
Well, so when this movie was completed, Carol Co. demanded a test screening, a process that Cameron hated after The Abyss, because remember, that's what caused him to make all the changes to the end of The Abyss. And when the screening took place, there was a consensus among the crowd, and that was that they hated this ending that was set in the future. Everyone hated it. So Cameron reluctantly gave in, and he added a new final scene.
Wait, let me just say too, the story I read said that Carol Co. demanded a screening. Casser flew to George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch in a helicopter through a storm, and it was delayed. And Cameron started the screening without him. Afterward, he snatched up all the preview cards and refused to show anything to Casser, anything that he missed. It said, but the viewers all still said the same thing.
Yeah.
Lose the ending. And finally, that's what made him relent. He was like, fine, fuck it.
I mean, when everyone's saying don't do this, maybe you should listen.
Yeah.
But afterwards, like for anything else they had to do, it still spawned another crew t-shirt, apparently. That said Terminator 3, not with me.
I want that shirt, honestly, because I feel that way about Terminator 3. So in the published version of the Terminator 2 script, Cameron discussed his logic in his introduction, saying, quote, "We decided not to tie it all up with a bow, but to suggest that the struggle was ongoing and in fact might even be an unending one for us flawed creatures trying to come to terms with technology and our own violent demons." So this new ending showed a stretch of highway at night. It's actually the same shot you see when they're pulling up to the Cyberdyne building at the end, where you see the highway and then it pans up to show Cyberdyne. It's the exact same footage. And Cameron had like 2 or 3 days to write this new scene, this voiceover, and figure out how to do it. They didn't have time to shoot anything else because the movie was about to come out. So he used footage he already had. And then he sent like the script. He dictated it actually to Linda Hamilton over the phone. She recorded it and sent it back via like T1, which was like the height of internet technology at the time.
Nice.
And that's how they ended up getting it, like with like days to spare, before the movie's supposed to come out. And her final voiceover says, "The
unknown future rolls toward us. I face it for the first time with a sense of hope. Because of a machine, a Terminator can learn the value of human life. Maybe we can too."
And I think this new ending is a pretty good compromise. Speaking to Newsweek a few months before the movie was released, Cameron described Terminator 2 as a violent movie about peace. He said, quote, "This is he said it is an action film about the value of human life." And this new ending still supported that nonviolent message. Like it's funny because we talked about this on The Abyss too, but that the ending of that is sort of very, very optimistic. And the ending of this is very optimistic as well.
Yeah.
But I think doing it in the theatrical cut, like the version with just that little bit of voiceover, it gets the point across in a way that is way less jarring for the audience than cutting to this scene of old Linda Hamilton, Grandma Sarah Connor.
Yeah,
it's tough to like I hate it for you, Jim, but it is true. It's and even in the early stuff, I don't think I even hit on as much with like John Connor's character, like how much he expected that. Not only was it about John Connor teaching a Terminator humanity, it was also that his mom has become this thing, or become this other person that he's like stepping in to help her step back from becoming a machine about what she's doing with everything, and realize her humanity. And so there's like this child is supposed to be like bonding these two things together to show like there's this like what humanity and morality really is, and that sort of thing. So,
well, to take it a step further, I mean, they always say your protagonist is your one who goes through the biggest change. And, you know, in this movie, I mean, John Connor's at an age where it's just, he's not really changing. He's experiencing this. We see a lot. He's the Greek chorus. We're seeing a lot of this through his eyes, especially if you didn't see the first one. But in terms of characters who go through the biggest change, it's Sarah Connor.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That takes the title and sort of shifts it a little bit. She's actually the Terminator.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
So as he had done on The Abyss, Cameron had a chance to release a special edition version of Terminator 2 when the film was released on VHS and Laserdisc in 1993. The special edition restored about 15 minutes of footage, including that original ending. Also restored was the dream sequence with Michael Biehn returning as Kyle Reese. Most of the other scenes are small, short scenes that give us a bit more time with the characters, but none are really necessary to the plot. Although I kind of had the same relationship with this as I do with some of his other extended versions, that some of these scenes I think are integral to the film and to character development. One of the most integral ones is one where they reprogram a chip that's in the Terminator's head. They do like surgery and pull this chip out and reprogram it. And that kind of explains how he starts to become more human and start to learn how to be human in the latter part of the film. And that got cut out of the original film. And I think that from a plot standpoint, from a character development standpoint, it explains why he acts the way he does later on in the film. One of my favorite moments from Terminator 2 is actually one of the restored scenes, and it's the one where John Connor is trying to teach the Terminator how to smile, you know, and he makes this really weird, awkward smile. They cut that out of the original movie, but I think it's a great little character moment. And there's a lot of great little character moments in the special edition that I think are really good. I do think that the pacing of the theatrical version is better because it's a chase film. Terminator 2 is a chase film from the moment that John Connor's at the mall till the steel factory at the end. It is a chase with very few moments of pause, you know, and you have to keep that momentum, you know, and so some of these moments kind of stop that momentum a little bit. But from a character standpoint, I do think that they add a lot to the film. The exception is the ending, which I think is terrible. The future ending I think is really bad. So I was actually really kind of thrilled when I rented the director's cut today, because my 4K disc of it only has the theatrical, and I rented the director's cut, and I was expecting it to end in that future scene, and it didn't. So I was like, oh, good. This is a better this is like the version of the movie. This is like, it's got all the other stuff, including the dream sequence, which I think is really good because it kind of speaks to Sarah's psychological state. You know, just like the other dream sequence that is in the theatrical cut where she sees Judgment Day, you know, but without that garbage ending. And I think it works really well. I really do. I think overall I prefer that director's cut, I would say.
Yeah, I'd be on board with that. The one I watched had the old Sarah ending.
Did it?
Yeah, just I don't think I'd ever seen it before, and I think I hit play without realizing that was what was in it.
Yeah.
So when it came up, I was completely thrown off. I was just like, "Oh, this sucks."
Yeah, it sucks. It does. But in the version I watched today, and I didn't even know this existed, but it has every other scene, but then the ending is still that black top highway.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, that's the version of the movie right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
So when do we get into the part about how it doesn't make any fucking sense?
Well, right fucking now, I guess.
No, I was just sitting here. I was listening to you guys debate this ending, and I'm like, well, okay, yeah. I mean, I'm with you. I think the blacktop. It's who I was. Oh God, what was I reading? Oh, back when we talked about aliens, Devin Faraci. He wrote. He says that aliens killed the Alien franchise. Like he talks about how that like it's a good movie on its own, but as far as the franchise, or it destroyed the xenomorph. I forget his exact words, but it's just basically like they're not as special anymore.
They're not as scary as they were.
Yeah, it kind of ruins the xenomorph. And I can almost accept like that in Terminator, that although everything happens the way it happens and blah, 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 it's still, everything still closes out the loop. Like it works, so that at the end you're like, all right, John Connor will still be born and there still will be Judgment Day. And
all that means is that they didn't stop anything.
Yeah, you didn't stop anything. Well, you can't have stopped anything. That's my point. You can't have stopped anything, or none of this fucking happened.
Right.
And so, or they're sending it to an alternate timeline, which why would the machine give a fuck about an alternate timeline? So it's thinking that this is the same timeline. And so this was the first movie in my life I remember watching as a kid in the theater, seeing this movie and being like blown away by how beautiful this whole movie was and loving it so much, but also walking out of the theater saying, wait a minute, Arnold just killed himself because there's still one chip left and it's right here in my fucking forehead and I'll kill myself. And that's it. Then we stopped it. Well, if you fucking stopped it, where did you come from? And where did John Connor come from? Because Kyle Reese came from that future. Where did any of this bullshit happen if that doesn't still happen?
Can I tell you the best argument against what you're saying?
Sure.
Terminator 3. They didn't stop it.
Well, yeah. Yes, they still didn't stop it. So,
they thought they stopped it at the end of Terminator 2.
Assuming it had ended in Terminator 2, which James Cameron was done, and they assumed they'd wrap this thing up. Nice little bow on the package. No, you didn't. No, because nothing changed. Nothing changed. Still, the fucking Terminators exist. You know they exist. So this future still happens. You've done nothing, Sarah Connor and John Connor.
I think this is where we insert the Ant-Man speech from Endgame of him sort of explain or getting time travel explained.
I think this is the part where we insert our the baby crying that we do on the somebody needs a nap sequence. Because I think Gary needs a nap. But no, I get what you're saying, Gary. I mean, you're right. From a logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense. But this movie is so goddamn good that I don't care. That's the truth of it. I don't care. And I can think of that stuff while I'm watching it, but I'm having such a good time with it that I can overlook the logical time travel paradox.
Listen, I spent this whole time, however long this has been, talking about all the cool stuff, and I love it, and I love the movie. I still love the movie. I'm just saying, it just,
we get it.
You fuck with time travel. It just never makes any fucking sense.
I know.
Nobody can ever make it make sense.
Nobody can do it except for Primer.
Primer just,
and Time Crimes probably.
They get so complicated that you're like, I guess
this is right. I'm not smart enough to tell you that it's not.
This probably works.
Yeah.
Terminator's not as interested in that. Terminator's just making an action movie. So I appreciate it as an action movie. It's just like, God dang. Like, really? It's just, I guess it just probably because it was also a huge heartbreak for me to have to see Arnold with his fucking thumb up in the air go down in the lava pit. And, it's like, why did that have to happen? And you're like, oh, because he's saving us from that future. And then you start to think about it. You're like, no, he didn't. He didn't. It didn't have to happen because that future is going to happen anyway. So his death was pointless. Killing Arnold, the most advanced Terminator that's ever lived. A Terminator.
No, well, the T-1000 is the most.
Yeah, advanced. But emotionally.
Well, anyway, I'm glad that we gave you this forum, Gary, because I was definitely going to pause at some point and just let you rant about the time travel stuff. So I'm glad you took it upon yourself.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. The more I thought about it, I was like, this has to get in here.
I gotta say something. I gotta say
it doesn't make fucking sense.
Gary's like eye is twitching.
Why in James Cameron's life and all the scientific bullshit he delves into does he not think for a second about goddamn time travel?
I think he probably did and figured that most people wouldn't care, which is the case.
All right. Anyway,
so when all was said and done, the final budget of Terminator 2 was somewhere in the range of 70 to 75 million. But with the cost of locking in the talent and securing the rights to the franchise, Carol Co. spent over $100 million on this film, making it the most expensive film in history. And this is only the first most expensive movie ever made that James Cameron is going to release. When the film hit
just
theaters,
his theme now.
That's what he does. But when the film hit theaters in July of 1991, Cameron's perfectionism and dictatorial shooting style were once again justified. That opening weekend, more than half of the movie tickets sold in North America were for Terminator 2. Think about that. That is insane. That is insane. It would go on to earn more than $200 million in the U.S. alone, which in 1991 is unheard of. It earned more than $500 million worldwide. At the time of its release, I mentioned this in our intro, but it was the third highest grossing movie of all time, right behind Star Wars and E.T. That's how big this movie was. The only movies that had made more money than this were Star Wars and E.T. Critical reviews were almost unanimously positive. Although, Gary, I sent you an article, a magazine, an essay, I would say, written a few years after. It wasn't at the time of release, but written about 6 years after the release of Terminator 2 by a guy you may have heard of named David Foster Wallace that was not positive. Did you have a chance to read that, Gary?
I read, yeah, he just.
I'm going to read.
He was pissed off about
everything
I didn't even care about.
Yeah,
because I would like to point out,
incredibly pretentious article. I mean, it's David Foster Wallace, so it's one of the most pretentious men to ever live.
Listen, I'm upset about the time travel, and that's my own problem, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, $500 million in 1992. I just did this on the inflation calculator. He made like $1,041,680,000.
That's some Avengers shit. That's some Avengers shit right there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So this David Foster Wallace article, and I'll try to remember to put this on like our Twitter and stuff so that other people can read it. But I'm just going to read a little blurb from it. Okay. This is the opening paragraph, actually. It says, quote, 1990s moviegoers who have sat clutching their heads in both awe and disappointment at movies like Twister and Volcano and The Lost World can thank James Cameron's Terminator 2 Judgment Day for inaugurating what's become this decade's special new genre of big budget film, special effects porn. Porn, because if you substitute FX for intercourse, the parallels between the two genres become so obvious they're eerie. Just like hardcore cheapies, movies like Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park aren't really movies in the standard sense at all. What they really are is half a dozen or so isolated, spectacular scenes comprising maybe 20 or 30 minutes of riveting, sensuous payoffs, strung together via another 60 to 90 minutes of flat, dead, and often hilariously insipid narrative. He goes on to say that...
Jeez.
Yeah. He goes on to say, T2 as a dramatic narrative is slick and cliche and calculating, and in some, an appalling betrayal of 1984's The Terminator. This entire article is like will make your like the veins pop out on your forehead. Like, and I'll send it to you guys. I mean, I sent it to Gary. I'll send it to you, Todd, if you want to read it. But I'll post it on our Twitter and stuff and our Facebook.
He sent it to me with saying, "This guy needs a nap."
I said, "Yeah." I sent Gary the link, and it just said David Foster Wallace needs a nap. So anyway, I feel like that's a good segue into other individuals who probably need a nap, but maybe aren't as good at writing probably as David Foster Wallace.
All right. Well, obviously I need a nap. That David Foster Wallace or whatever his fucking name is.
You know who David Foster Wallace is, right?
No. Who is that?
He's a very, very famous novelist.
Okay. I was like, why did I just think of that name all of a sudden?
Yeah. He wrote Infinite Jest.
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
He died in 10, 12 years ago, probably. I don't know. I think he committed suicide. But yeah, Infinite Jest is like the most well-known of his work. But
and it's like a super huge book. And
Infinite Jest is over 1,000 pages. Yes.
Yeah. I remember a girl I worked with reading
Sounds
that
infinite.
because a dude she was dating was super into it or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, all those people need a nap. Anyway, I'm happy to say though that whoever the guy was, I just wipe him out of my brain that you just said that disturbed me with his special effects porn article. Nobody is as well written as him for their
David Foster Wallace, the guy we just spent 2 minutes talking about.
Yeah. Was it the same guy?
It's the same guy. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just piecing this together. Holy shit. That guy. Well, fuck him all the way around.
He's passed away.
Yeah.
So.
Well, necrophilia, I guess.
Oh, wow.
To be fair, just side note story, just in the middle of this episode for anybody that can appreciate it. The other day, I was like super tired, and I was like super tired for like 2 weeks straight, all the time.
Sounds like COVID.
Yeah, maybe. I told Jen, she was like, "Why are you so sleepy all the time right now?" And I was like, "I think I've got narcolepsy." And no, I'm sorry. That's what I should have said. What I said was, I think I've got necrophilia.
Oh no. much bigger news.
To be fair, that will tire you out.
She was like, and it connects back to David Foster Wallace.
Yeah. I think I have necrophilia. I've been sneaking out a lot at night and raiding graveyards.
Oh my God. Anyway. Not the right word was the point. Here's Grady, gave it a 0.5 star on Letterboxd, says, this movie sucks. The kid's annoying. Action is boring. Premise sucks so much I can't stress enough how much I dislike watching and skipping through this movie. That was the I can't even pronounce this person's username. Gave it a 0.5 star, said, started watching it on Pluto, but it was the Spanish version, so I turned it off. I'm racist.
Oh my God.
I just enjoyed that one. 0.5 star from Jimmy, who says, watching this movie was the equivalent of the feeling when you take a dump and then you find out you don't have toilet paper. Here's Jeff. Worst sequel ever, he says. It was such a shame to see a sequel as lame as this made for one of the better sci-fi movies of all time. Sure, the effects, particularly the T-1000, were brilliant for their time and worth seeing the movie for, but special effects do not a great film make. And just about everything else in this film was average to very poor. The, quote, acting, the inclusion of a child as the main character, the story, all of it, it's all lame. There is something wrong with this film being at a higher spot than its prequel. Yeah.
Terminator Salvation.
Yeah, that's the one they're talking about. Jesse James Cowboy 3 says, not worth watching. Not only does it have the worst acting I've ever seen in a movie in a long time, the visual effects are so horrible nowadays. How could they have won awards for editing? What do you mean nominated when almost every window that gets broken breaks or explodes before anything gets near it? This movie has the worst green screen visual effects. How bad were all the other movies the year before this to win so many Oscars?
I don't think they know what editing is. I don't think they know what that means.
Quadrophilia says dull. I like the first one, but this one was meh. John O'Connor. I just wanted the Terminator to turn around and say, you know what? I have thought instead of not killing one, I've changed my mind, and you're first. He's annoying.
John O'Connor.
John O'Connor. That's a very different movie.
Yeah,
I want Arnold to quote that.
Look, Janelle and Todd, they're dicks. But I got
John O'Connor.
What's wrong with her? She's never this nice.
You know what?
It's actually the best accent you've ever done, Todd.
Available for parties, bar mitzvahs, corporate events.
Oh God,
man! If I ever make a new Leprechaun movie, we're calling you, Todd.
Okay, thanks.
Half star from Funny Bear, who says this is my least favorite film of all time.
Wow, of all time.
This film is an absolute dumpster fire and an embarrassment to the absolutely incredible movie that the first one was. Everything the first one did well, this piece of shit fucked that up. Perhaps one day I'll go back and watch it just to give it another chance. Then I'll properly expand on all of what makes this absolute flaming piece of dog shit. But until then, I fucking hate this movie.
What do you think that person thinks about the following sequels?
I don't know.
If this is their least favorite movie of all time.
Oh. 1 star from Niblewig. This movie sucks. You just like it because you saw it when you were 12.
I was 9. Thank you very much.
1 star here from I Love Batterate. I don't know. Why did the robot have a massive dong? Was there?
Did we see his dong? Oh, I mean, we see the people, like the ladies in the biker bar, like looking down at it, like, hey, but we don't see it. We don't see it.
Yeah. Demi gave it 1 star and said, I found this whole movie to not give answers or have much meaning. However, my boyfriend told me that the kid taught the Terminator how to be human, which is something I didn't pick up on.
Oh, you're not paying attention to the movie.
Clearly.
This is disturbing because it says it's from the Bone Master.
Oh, wow.
Speaking of porn.
Yeah, it says it's from the Bone Master, but I think it also might be my wife. It's weird. 0 out of 10, the dog dies.
Yeah, but only in the director's cut.
And I saved this one for last just because this one just confounds. Patrick Starr, January 20th, 2022 wrote this.
Wait. We've had a review from Patrick Starr before.
Have we?
Recently, maybe on the first Terminator.
Maybe.
Which I assume is SpongeBob's best friend, right?
Maybe that makes sense. January 20th, 2022. So this is recent as we're recording this, as far as reviews go. Half star. The only thing he said was the only sequel I've ever seen that might be as bad as The Empire Strikes Back.
God damn it.
Whoa.
That guy, he's just trolling. There's no way. That guy is just trolling. There's no way he means that.
But yeah, that's those people needed that.
Wow. So at least 1 or 2 of those mentioned the acting and or John Connor specifically. What do you guys think about Eddie Furlong in this movie?
I think he serves his purpose. He's obviously he's
look, you got a child actor who's never acted before.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's not going to come across. I mean, he's got that certain something that they were able to pick up on. They were able to very quickly polish and refine it to look okay. But at the end of the day, like,
he's inexperienced.
Yeah, he's inexperienced, and he's up against some pretty big.
Is it the biggest spotlight most people could ever fucking have?
I honestly think his performance. I think it's uneven. I think there are some scenes where he's very, very good, and you can definitely see what Cameron and his casting director thought, what they saw in him. There are other scenes where his line readings are not great, or he speaks the next line too quickly, which is a part of that inexperience. But like, for instance, the scene where they go to Miles Dyson's house and he's kind of consoling his mom, where she's like, did you come here to stop me? And he's really good in that scene. And there's a lot of scenes that he's really good, and there are other scenes where he's not great in. But I think a lot of those scenes, the ones that he's not great in, aren't necessarily his fault. I think some of his dialogue as written is a little cringy. It's in a large part, I think it's because Cameron and Bill Wisher write some of his like cool kid dialogue as if they've never met a child before and and their only frame of reference was Bart Simpson.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. Yeah,
no problemo. Like nobody fucking says that. Like it's like, I don't know. There's something about it that's like, it feels very much like a 35-year-old man writing for a 10-year-old.
You gotta say hasta la vista, baby.
Yeah,
like anybody's ever fucking said that before at this point.
Exactly.
Like even Spanish speaking people. Like, that's not like a thing they just normally say.
Right. So, but I think that like there are scenes where he's very, very good, I think. And it's kind of a shame that his career didn't go many places past this. I mean, he did Pet Sematary 2, I think, right after this. He obviously does like The Crow later on. Pecker's really good. John Waters' Pecker.
American
really
History X.
But yeah, American History X he's really good in that. But I think, of course, he's also had some substance abuse problems and things like that.
In this movie, just so you know, since we're talking about him, I mean, he ended up in a relationship with the 29-year-old woman who was his on-set tutor during the filming of this film. What? Yeah.
Wait, what?
Oh yeah, this is 100% true. Yeah, he ended up in a relationship with the 29-year-old woman who was his on-set tutor during this movie.
That'll fuck a kid up.
She eventually became his manager, and of course, he starred in all the movies we're talking about, including some other not so great choices that she helped that process on. He got engaged to her, and then they split up. She sued him for money she thought he owed him for being his manager. Also claimed he was physically abusive. Also during this process, he was highly on heroin and cocaine and alcoholism. And Edward Furlong is a whole other thing. But yeah, there was some, he'd already been a troubled kid.
He had a tough upbringing.
It never stopped. It doesn't help that he is like our age now and still somehow looks like he is he's like a mixed up 15-year-old.
Yeah.
And I mean that with all the love and respect, Eddie. I know you're listening to this. I just mean, I get a very young face.
I would like for him to, I would love to see I would love for him to get his shit together, because I think he has potential to be really good, because some of the stuff I've seen him in is very good. You mentioned American History X. He's
Pecker in American History X.
Detroit Rock City. I will always go to bat for that movie. I think that movie's a blast.
That's a fun movie.
It's a fun movie. Granted, that movie was 20 some odd years old at this point, but
dude, I think these child stars are like, these youngs, I get, well, he was a child star. Yeah. These people are, that's a tough process, man.
It's tough because it's
many people don't make it out of that.
Yeah, and he's one of, unfortunately, he seems to be one of the non-success stories. Not that he's still working, but he's, if you look at his IMDb, it's all like kind of direct to video, not great
Star
stuff.
Trek web series.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it's tough. And that's Hollywood, man. It'll fuck you up.
It'll chew you up and spit you out. Yeah. If you don't have somebody looking over you and looking for out for your best interest,
which it didn't sound like this dude had.
Yeah. I will say that when I was a kid watching this movie, so I saw this movie when I was, like I said, 9 years old. I saw it in the summer of 1991. First R-rated movie I ever saw in the movie theater. I saw it before I ever saw the first Terminator movie. My dad took me to see it, and I was immediately obsessed. I will say this movie is the first movie I ever remember seeing and thinking, how did they do that? Like, it's the movie that made me wonder how movies were made. In fact, I would say this podcast wouldn't exist if it were not for the curiosity in my brain that was spawned by Terminator 2. This is the movie that made me wonder about how movies got made. Before that, it was all like they just existed. But with this, it was like, how did they pull this off? What is going on? Like, it blew my mind, right? And honestly, John Connor, when I was a kid, I thought was the coolest fucking dude, because I was going to a conservative Christian elementary school where nobody talked like John Connor. Nobody wore Public Enemy t-shirts and listened to Guns N' Roses. Most of the kids that I went to school with would not have been allowed to see this movie, you know? So now, or when I was watching this, I just thought, like, I remember going to school I probably saw this on a weekend and going to school on like Monday morning and telling all my friends about it and reenacting scenes, and most of them being John Connor scenes where he's like, you're calling moi a dipshit, you know, but I wouldn't say dipshit. I would like say, you know, dip S word or whatever dumb
Dip
kids
S-word.
like the version I was allowed to say.
Yeah. I mean, even if you were in like a conservative school, like I was in public school during this time, and I can say for sure, like, I mean, as much shit as I'm talking right now, this movie worked for kids my age, like it, and girls had Eddie Furlong pictures plastered all over their fucking binders, their lockers, and I was gonna say their what's it called, the
trapper keepers,
and their binders and such that they used. No, Eddie Furlong was a heartthrob. He was like Tiger Beat.
He was Tiger Beat.
He was the dude.
Yeah.
So it wasn't all the crap we're giving him for like the things he said. I mean, it worked for our age at the time.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, and watching it this time, I in the past I've thought he was not that good in it, but he's actually very good in most of the movie. There are just some dialogue scenes here and there where he's not great, and they probably could have, if he had been a little bit more experienced, he could have pulled it off. But the movie overall obviously is not really hurt by that, despite what some of those people in the reviews you read said. Here's the thing. James Cameron knows how to make a fucking sequel. He proved it with Aliens, where he took Ridley Scott's concept and put his own stamp on it. He turned Aliens into a James Cameron movie. So while that film is tonally very different from the original, he still peppered in scenes of that kind of claustrophobic horror that you were used to from the first movie. The one that comes to mind is the one where Ripley and Newt are in the lab and the face hugger comes in. That feels very much like a scene from the Ridley Scott movie. And I think that, to me, is what a great sequel is. It's a movie that acknowledges the original film, but isn't beholden to it in a way that makes you feel like you're just seeing a rehash. It continues the story. And,
clearly James Cameron is like concerned with world building. Like he loves like building.
I mean, that's what he's doing with all of this. 5 Avatar movies,
Right. Like he loves building these like alternate realities that somehow connect back to our own, that like represent all the lessons we should learn. I mean, I feel like that's like his thing right this second.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's he'll have his moments here. I don't know if we can do that with True Lies, but
we'll see. Well, I mean,
he's world building where Jamie Lee Curtis does strip teases.
Listen, young Justin Bishop, that Jamie Lee Curtis striptease scene was integral to my upbringing.
Well, I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying
we'll talk about that next.
Justify that as far as world building goes. But
built my world. I'll tell you that.
The world would be a better place if you had more of that. But
so you guys grew up with this movie, though, right? With Terminator 2.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Gary, you're my age.
Another TV viewing for me, for sure.
Yeah. Well, you're a couple years younger than us, so you would have been probably far too young. You would have been like 6 years old when it came out, right?
Yeah.
I swear to God, like I remember this being as big as like as far as like quintessential, like huge fucking movies. So this would have been before Jurassic Park, right? So
2 years earlier.
Jurassic Park would have been in that thought, but like before that, I mean, I would have had to have been this and like Batman.
If you're talking about movies that made me a movie buff,
right? They're like huge.
This is the Mount Rushmore
in childhood.
Yeah, this is my Mount Rushmore of movies. As far not necessarily meaning it's like in my top 5 movies, although it's probably in my top 5 movies, or at least top 10. But like movies that
Don't put on airs, Justin.
Movies that made me like fall in love with movies.
Right.
Movies
Terminator
that, like,
2,
I mean,
Jurassic
like, literally,
Park.
I know it sounds cliche or maybe like hyperbole or whatever. The world fucking stopped for this movie. Like this movie was like a huge.
It was a phenomenon.
It was a universal thing. Like
a legitimate phenomenon.
Right.
Well, and this time, you know, when James Cameron's doing this, he's doing the same thing he did with Aliens, where he's building on the previous story, but he's doing it with his own story. And he's doing it by introducing elements of the original film, like the Brad Fiedel score in this, which we joked about at the beginning of the show, but it's iconic, but it also links this to the first film.
Yeah.
So that it establishes this as a continuation of that story. And then there are also like things like the Terminator's entrances, you know, which very much mirror Arnold's entrance in the original film.
Mm-hmm.
But here he's, of course, not working on that scrappy Roger Corman budget. That's $6 million that he's, you know, had for Terminator. By this time, Cameron owns Hollywood. I mean, he is literally making the biggest movie that's ever been made. But it still feels like a Terminator movie, even if it's tonally very different from the first film. And I think
it built like a whole mythology. Like it took that. I mean, that first movie was great, and I could still argue with it being as great as this movie in its own way. But it took what little bit of a piece of a mythology you could have built off the first one into like creating like the fucking franchise. Like, I mean, this created like a whole world of possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And your first indication in this one, I think that he's doing something a little bit different this time around. And I'd never really thought about this before watching it this time, but it's when Arnold steps out of the biker bar, which I thought that biker bar scene was so cool when I was a kid because Arnold was such a badass. You know,
he literally, side note, he talks about in the commentary that he literally fought with the editors. He had like 2 editors on his side about using bad to the bone.
Yeah.
In that scene, and that it was that like when he walked out, and he was basically saying that he wanted that song, and people were like, "What? It's been used in a couple other things before this," and like, no, it's probably not the thing. He's like, no, this is fun.
Yeah,
this is the fun song. That's
what it is. Like that.
He's like, it is the rare opportunity. In the commentary, he was trying to describe like it's the rare opportunity the movie steps outside itself for just a minute that you can appreciate that, like, here's the ultimate badass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. Like, that's George Thorogood and the Destroyers, Bad to the Bone. It's not a great song. I think it's a pretty fucking stupid song, but but it's this like needle drop establishes that this movie's going to be a little bit more playful than the first film. You know, it's fun. Like, Arnold's a badass. You know, it's immediately apparent that this time Cameron's allowing himself to have a little more fun, whereas the first film, as we discussed, is more it's a slasher movie. This time it's an action movie. It's a popcorn movie is what he's doing this time around. And the first few sequences of this film, like you've got the future sequence, which is great. And then the Terminator's entrance, both Terminator's entrance, but then you've got Arnold going into that biker bar, and when he steps out and you see the close up of his like motorcycle boot, Bad to the Bone starts playing, you're like, all right, we're in for something different now. That's when you know.
Yeah.
You know?
I got this quote from him. He said, "We shot and edited the film in under 13 months. It was an enormous grind. The first time I saw the film with an audience, the moment Arnold walks down the steps of the bar in his motorcycle outfit, it got the biggest reaction. And I thought, why are they reacting so strongly here? Because they got it. There's nothing more I have to explain or do to make this guy the baddest ass killer in the world.
Yep.
If I could get that within the first 3 minutes, then all the other mayhem and feats of indestructibleness I put after this aren't going to get me any more of a reaction than this moment I created right here. At that point, I became convinced this movie is going to work."
Yeah, he's absolutely right. I mean, that's his instincts kicking in because he knows what works with audiences, you know. So by 1991, Arnold was a full-fledged action star. I mean, thanks in a large part to his work on The Terminator, but in between The Terminator and Terminator 2, he had done movies like Commando, Predator, Total Recall, Kindergarten Cop, which I adore, which is, honestly, I don't know for sure, but it's probably the first Arnold movie I ever watched in the theater was Kindergarten Cop. I still love that movie. I think it holds up really well. But with those films, he'd proven that he had, especially with Kindergarten Cop, he'd proved that he had some comedic chops and that he could deliver dialogue in a way that a lot of Hollywood insiders kind of doubted early on in his career.
Yeah.
Including on The Terminator. People thought he wouldn't be able to do it because he had this strong Austrian accent. But he proved that he was really good with dialogue. And by 1991, he was kind of the king of one-liners, because of Commando and Raw Deal and like all these things,
Yeah.
And Cameron plays into that here. Like he gives him a lot of one-liners in this movie because he's playing into Arnold's persona.
I take a lot of shit for the stuff I get about Vin Diesel, or like I love The Rock, or like I love these dudes, and yeah, they are the masculine, like just man's man
machismo
guys.
archetype.
Yeah. But I also just appreciate, and Arnold's the OG. This is a guy who knows what he does, and he does it perfectly. He knows what the fuck Arnold Schwarzenegger does.
Yeah.
And there's just, I don't know, man. I respect that guy. I think he's brilliant, and he could try so much more. And it's not that he's too dumb to do something else, like Hamlet or whatever.
Arnold is incredibly intelligent.
Yeah. But it's like, Arnold knows what Arnold does, and Arnold, like he's prolific as far as like being an actor. This guy is rich for a reason. This guy, like, he made himself.
Yeah.
I respect the hell out of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And I think we even talked about folks like Jennifer Tilly back in our Wachowski series, who she ended up like realizing, oh, that's the thing. They'll keep cutting me checks if I keep doing this shtick over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant play. It's a really brilliant play.
You know what you're good at. And Arnold's performance here alternates between the stoic killer from the first film and a sort of father figure for John Connor. John teaching the T-800 about the basics of human emotion in this movie is like surprisingly sweet. I actually saw one writer compare it to the little girl showing Frankenstein's monster how to like throw flowers into the pond.
Bro, get out of here. If you don't think I know now why you cry, but it's something I could never do, go fuck yourself. And then it hits you right.
It's a great moment. And it, like, if you think about it too much, it doesn't make any sense, because he, like, literally a scene before he asks what's wrong with your eyes, he says, like, I have detailed files on human anatomy, like, what fucking tear ducts are, but he doesn't know the emotional part of that, right? And we talked about on our Abyss episode about the kind of optimism at the end of The Abyss, which threw people off at the time of its release. People didn't know, because they were expecting another horror film, I guess, from James Cameron. But Cameron, he does that here again to an even greater effect, I think. The final goodbye, which you're referring to, Gary, between John and the T-800 is, I think, one of the most moving scenes that Cameron ever filmed, right up there with like the resuscitation scene I talked about during The Abyss, or the, spoiler alert, because you haven't seen it, Gary, but Jack's final scene in Titanic. You've seen the memes.
Know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I know she doesn't let him on a raft or something.
But also, let's not forget that this is an action movie, and one of the best fucking action movies that has ever existed. And like, I will die on that hill. Maybe even the best action movie that has ever existed. This is like up there for me.
Justin coming in with the hot takes.
That's a real hot take. Nobody has that opinion. But like, nothing like this has been made before or since, really. I mean, after this, action movies changed because of this movie.
Game
like
changer for sure.
Yeah. And for all of the talk that of CGI breakthroughs on this film, Cameron also still understands that even cutting edge effects need to be integrated with practical ones. The CGI moments are incredible, but Even 3 decades later, we're 30 plus years on, but like the T-1000 bursting through the helicopter window and then reforming next to the pilot, that still plays really well. I think
it is surprising how good it still looks.
Yeah. But to me, I think nothing really compares to like the tractor trailer jumping into the flood canal, off that bridge, or even the motorcycle jumping, that stunt, or the climactic chase, that we talked about earlier, where the helicopter flies under the overpass. Seeing all that stuff done practically, like nothing compares to that.
Nothing will ever beat let's see if we can almost kill someone.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like seeing somebody almost die on film. It's like, I always think when I think of stunts like that, like blow my mind, I always think of Maniac Cop, like that final death for Maniac Cop, where the bus the van jumps off the pier and the stuntman is like flipping out, and you're like,
that fucking could have landed on that guy.
That guy's within inches of dying, right?
And no. It's 100% true. We're like joking about it, but again, we love stunt guys on this show, and it's just because like these are people who literally, like seriously, literally are putting their lives on the line
for
make
our
a
entertainment
fucking movie.
For our entertainment, yeah. And I also love that Cameron isn't afraid to go back to his Roger Corman roots when it makes sense. He will find a lo-fi way to get a shot if it needs to be done. I personally, and I know some people aren't like this, but I personally like when the seams show every now and then on a movie, like in this movie, there are some of the driving scenes where it's clearly like rear projection, like they're not in a real car, they're on a set and there's rear projection behind them. But I like that because I don't know, it adds to the movie. I like seeing that movie magic.
There's some cool through lines, like we're gonna get to Avatar eventually, but that fucking Avatar movie has a fucking mech suit battle at the end. I don't know, I just love that, like from even the beginning,
from Xenogenesis.
From Xenogenesis.
But I also like that you can tell that this is a movie sometimes, like even with all the cutting edge effects. One scene that I really think of is Sarah's dream of like the nuclear annihilation, which is clearly done in like miniatures. That scene, by the way, was done by the team of Robert and Dennis Skotak of 4 Ward Productions. The Skotaks had previously won an Academy Award for visual effects on both Aliens and The Abyss, and they would also win one for Terminator 2. A year later, they were nominated for their work. They didn't win, but they were nominated for their work on Tim Burton's Batman Returns. So to pull off the scene in Terminator 2, they studied hours of nuclear test footage before building dozens of miniature buildings, then destroying their model using air mortars. This had been done just a couple of years later. Probably it would have been almost definitely like entirely CGI.
Oh yeah.
But there's something about the practical use of models, even when you can tell that they're miniatures, that adds a palpability to the scene.
Very much.
That wouldn't be the same if it were all CGI. I love the look of that. I mean, it looks fake. Yeah, but it doesn't look CGI fake. It's a different type of fake that works better for me. I don't know if that makes sense, but
you adjust, a little bit of the film speed. You add in some good sound design, and I buy it.
It's good. And that scene,
it looks
and
good.
There were scientific
Sarah,
letters of praise, by the way, from people that nuclear explosion that Sarah Connor experienced was very realistic.
Well, that's because, like I said, they studied actual nuclear testing footage, and then that final moment of Sarah burning away and just her skeleton holding on. That's just such an iconic image. It's so cool.
It's still used in GIFs to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very meme worthy.
Well, there's a shot where like she's in the interrogation room watching the old video of one of her previous interviews, and she talks about the people blow apart like leaves. And I caught that this time, and then when it came to that scene, I was just like, let's watch her. That's exactly what happens.
Yeah, that's exactly
it
what
looks
happens.
just like it.
I mean, while we're talking about it, I guess we've got to talk. We've acknowledged her performance a little bit, but Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor in this movie. I remember watching this for the first time, and even when I was 9 years old, like Hamilton's presence was, and I knew her from Beauty and the Beast. I was aware of that show at the time, but her presence was striking in this.
Yeah.
She is an absolute badass. Like her entrance is one of the best character entrances in all of film.
Yeah.
You see her doing pull-ups. You don't see her face. You just see like Cameron like focusing on like her biceps and her shoulders as she's doing her push-ups, and then she turns around, she sweats soaked in her hair's in her face, and she's just got like these intense eyes. Like, it is a great character entrance, but she's also like throughout the film, like
I just want her to smack me around.
I know, I just want her to like what do we just crush my head.
Just step on me a little bit.
Just step on my neck.
No, this is getting really disturbing, but no, you know what though did stand out to me, like I legitimately, as much as many of the other iconic scenes, and I'm glad you said that, because this legitimately has always been a cemented memory in my brain, is that fucking dude licking her face.
Yeah.
And I've always been like, when she fucking gets revenge,
it's so satisfying.
Yeah, that's always stood out to me, even
and
from a kid.
When she smacks
what
him
a
with
fucking creep.
Yeah, and when she smacks him with the broken mop handle, like you see pieces fly, and I don't know if it's like his glasses or how they did that.
Yeah,
does she actually smack him, or like, because they're not CGing that they're not really doing like CG blood splatter and stuff like that at this time. So every time I watch it, I'm like, holy shit, did she actually like hit that guy? I don't know.
She looks like she like breaks his fucking face.
Yeah. And he deserves it. Like, and if you watch the director's cut, it's even more powerful, because there's an earlier scene where he's like forcing her to take her medicine, and he like hits her with the billy club in the stomach and stuff. So it's even worse in that. It's not like Rob Zombie's Halloween bad, the mental health.
Well, nothing should be, Rob.
But also, like, the way that Linda Hamilton moves in this, she's so incredibly confident.
Yeah.
A lot of that due to her training with Uzi Gal, but like one moment that's always that's always kind of stuck with me is after she beats up that orderly, and she takes his billy club and she's running down the hallway. She kind of tucks that billy club under her arm.
Yes.
Yep.
Like, it looks like someone who knows what she's doing.
Yep.
She is like such a badass, and every time she handles a gun, like, it does not feel like an actor doing it. It really feels like somebody who has years of experience doing this.
Yeah.
No, Linda Hamilton owns that fucking role.
But and she also, the great thing about it is that she's, as badass as she is, she's not a Terminator. Like, she's still human. She's still a mother. That scene in Miles Dyson's house where John comes and she, I mentioned it earlier, but she says, like, she's moved that he came to stop her from killing. That's a great scene. Through all of her toughness, she never loses the fact that she's a mother, and and that she's a human. Like,
I was going to say that she's human.
And in that same scene, like with Miles Dyson, like, she's trying to murder him and she can't do it. She becomes like this hyperventilating mess. I think that she is really as much attention as Arnold gets and things like that. Like, Sarah Connor's the heart of this movie. This is I think it was you, Gary, that mentioned this earlier on, but this is a movie about a Terminator learning what it's like to be human, but it's also about Sarah Connor learning to be human again. That's really what this movie is about. And that's what James Cameron intended. If you read his interviews and things where he's talking about what the themes of this movie might be, that's what it is. It's like learning, people are very easily turned into machines, like mindless, cruel machines. And this is about us regaining our humanity.
Yeah.
And
hey, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. No. She and weirdly enough, I forgot about this, but they apparently did marry for like a brief minute. And
I thought they might have. I had not looked it up.
They divorced in 99 is what I have here. I just saw that.
So they were married for years then.
15 years.
Wait,
wow, I have that in my notes and I totally forgot about it.
That doesn't work. 1999. They just met. They just moved in together in 91.
Oh no, I'm sorry. With the article I pulled that from, which was from the New York Times, She said she had been celibate for 15 years. This is all weird.
That's a very different conversation.
It was about the New York Times article I was reading was about her coming back for Dark Fate. She had left Hollywood. Like she had kind of given up on Hollywood and she moved to New Orleans and she was living alone and like just doing her own thing. And, but she came back for Dark Fate. I haven't seen Dark Fate, but anyway, now that's a rabbit hole I've gone down. But apparently they were married.
They were married briefly, yeah.
But no, I mentioned that like that part of the thing with the John Connor thing that James Cameron was like super into was like, not only are you turning this killing machine, like a literal killing machine, into a human, your human mother has become a killing machine, she is on track to be
become one. Yes. And it's about John Connor pulling her back to her humanity, basically.
Yeah. Because you've seen like the fate of the whole world and all of that. And yeah, I love that. I love that like John Connor doesn't have, like I mentioned before, he can't explain specifically why you don't kill people. He's just like, I don't know, if you've lived your whole life with your mom telling you you're the savior of all humanity, like you're the leader of humanity, I guess you logically conclude that killing humans is a bad idea.
Right.
and so, so that's why he tells the Terminator, you just don't do that.
Just don't do it.
Because that's just how it is.
At the end of the day, and I don't think this is hyperbole to say so, I think this is one of the most perfect examples of blockbuster filmmaking that has ever been made. It almost feels like a crossroads of sorts. This is sort of the end of the era of those kind of gleefully nasty 80s action movies that Arnold had starred in, like Commando, stuff that's really fun, but like, a little more mean-spirited and definitely like more for a more niche crowd. And the beginning of the 90s era where action movies would become more approachable and family friendly pieces of mass entertainment. Like Terminator 2 changed everything in forms of what action movies were and in regards to what special effects could do. Like Jurassic Park would not exist if it were not for Terminator 2. Like this movie is like, if you're marking on the timeline of movie history, if you're marking like integral moments of filmmaking, Terminator 2 is one of those.
Yeah.
Like one of those moments where everything changed. This is one of them. And then of course this inspired Jurassic Park, or not inspired, but the special effects fueled what they did in Jurassic Park. And that of course even fueled how many other changes in Hollywood. You could put Star Wars, Jaws, all these movies, but Terminator 2 is on that list. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say.
No, I think that's on. Yeah, that absolutely tracks.
No, it's crazy. Like as we do these things, to see all the connections and like just how this all weaves into like a huge web of what Hollywood is. Like that's one of my favorite parts about this podcast and what we do is hearing all these connections from people. But yeah, they're obviously, as much as I'd love to give Terminator all the credit, it's the same argument I would make for like Halloween as opposed to like Black Christmas. It's like, as far as slasher movies, it's like, yeah, maybe somebody's done something similar to this,
but Halloween's the one who,
but Halloween did it. Like that's on the map. That's
Halloween's the one that inspired the imitators, not Black Christmas.
That's the checkpoint. And it's like Terminator 2 is one of those checkpoints in movie history that like it just, things changed because Terminator 2 existed. Terminator 2 altered the future of Hollywood, and you can't change that despite what time traveling magic you try to pull into.
Well, guys, it's come to that point where we talk about the films that we would pair with this one. If somebody enjoyed Terminator 2, what else would we recommend to them to watch? What's our further viewing for Terminator 2?
We've mentioned, I think any Arnold movie is really the answer here.
Yeah.
It's like Predator or Total Recall or I don't know. I mean, if you really want to, if you want to get fucking stupid, you can do like Looper, Edge of Tomorrow, or something. Get us some time travel bullshit. But
I mean, technically, Edge of Tomorrow is not really time travel, but
it is. He dies and he goes back.
And then... not in the same way, but
whatever.
Whatever. I mean, yeah, any Arnold movie would be good. I mean, you could also do Terminator 3 if you wanted to, or Terminator Dark Fate, or what, if you want to see the return of Linda Hamilton.
With mine, I'm actually going to disagree with you, Justin. I think if anybody really wants something that goes perfectly with Terminator 2, and we usually do break away from the franchise.
Sequels, yeah.
But I got to say, if you haven't seen the Sarah Connor Chronicles, you absolutely need to.
I think the Sarah Connor Chronicles is the best follow-up to Terminator.
If you enjoy the world, and we spoke at great length about the world that James Cameron, really built and expanded with these first two movies, this is chapter 3. And
it's good.
You get to see some of those really fun details, the things that really make T-1000 scary kind of come to the surface. You see, the ramifications of Kyle Reese's involvement in the, when he first came back, and, all of these things playing out, and John Connor growing up. He's not in his 20s yet, but he's dangerously close to being this young man, and Sarah just desperate to protect him, and it all just plays out. And it was so good, and I was so brokenhearted when it was canceled.
Every part of your description right now makes me fucking pissed off. Like, it makes me think I'm gonna hate everything about it. It's like,
it's so good,
Gary.
None
of this makes sense.
No, it is really outstanding. It is it only ran for 2 seasons. Lena Headey, who probably is best known as Cersei from Game of Thrones, she plays Sarah Connor in it. Thomas Dekker plays John Connor, who was in Heroes, I think was the only other thing I know him from. But Summer Glau, who I love from Firefly and stuff, she's in it. Brian Austin Green, I think, is in it, if I remember right.
Oh,
and Garrett Dillahunt, who's one of my favorite character actors, plays a Terminator in it, and he's like a T-888 or something like that, and he's awesome. And here, the person who really surprised me in that show, Shirley Manson, lead singer of Garbage, is in it, and she's like a T8, she's like a T-1000 type. She's like a shape-shifting Terminator, and she's so good in it. She's great. It's a great show. Honestly, I was also very bummed when it got canceled, because like I said, it's only like 2 seasons, but it's worth checking out. I think.
Thanks,
I think
Fox.
Yeah. Fuck you, Fox. But I would agree with you. I mean, that's, it's not exactly double feature because it's a 30 some odd episodes of a TV show, but it's an outstanding show. I think. Yeah, it's the best continuation of the lore that we've gotten.
Yeah, and to be honest, I tried to think of something outside the franchise that really paired well with this, and nothing really was just like, oh, that's perfect.
Right.
I mean, like Gary said, aside from another Arnold movie, like there's not really anything that stacks up to this.
I mean, obviously, like Total Recall and Terminator 2 would be a great double feature. Like that'd be a good night on the couch, right?
Yeah.
But what do you have, Gary? Other than, do you have just other than another Terminator movie? Is that just where you're going?
I mean, I just think this is like an Arnold thing. Like I would say Arnold overpowers everything on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I had a hard time coming up with something for this one, but I kind of wish I hadn't like blown the load on Terminator 2 Shocking Dark, which I mentioned in our Terminator episode, because I legitimately love that movie, and Lady Terminator I legitimately love. But if I'm going to pick another one and sticking with the kind of low budget, like, B movie types, like those,
Corman-esque.
Yeah, I'm gonna go Albert Pyun's Cyborg, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Oh,
1989.
Oh hell yeah!
It is not what I would call a good movie, but it is what I would call a very fun movie. And Albert Pyun, if you're not familiar with him, he is kind of the king of these types of like low budget B movies. He did the Captain America movie from the 80s. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
He did Nemesis. He did Charles Band's Doll Man, like a bunch of really dumb shit. But stuff that's like dumb, but also very, very fun. But Cyborg, and I think Cyborg has a couple sequels, though I'm not sure that I've seen them.
Yeah.
But the original Cyborg is pretty fun, with Jean-Claude Van Damme as a cyborg from the far future of the 21st century.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna do all that, I mean, you can just go like Universal Soldier. Or something
Universal
like that.
Soldier was actually another one that I considered, honestly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm with you there.
Yeah, that's fun.
I don't know. Don't give me a shitty TV show that got canceled, Todd.
Hey,
it's a good TV show.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Well, Terminator 2 took home 4 Academy Awards. It won Academy Awards for sound, makeup, visual effects, and sound effects editing. We have had to date 4 additional sequels, plus a television show, as Todd mentioned, none of which I think have come close to holding up to Cameron's films, although I would argue that the Sarah Connor Chronicles is the closest.
Right.
But the film's real legacy lies in the world of computer generated effects. The strides that ILM made, that Cameron pushed them to make, changed the world of filmmaking. Dennis Muren said, this is a quote from Dennis Muren. He said, and we kind of already talked about this, but this is coming from the horse's mouth. He said, T2 was the film that changed everything. And the work that ILM did on the film made their next big project possible. That film, released 2 years after T2, was Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park, a film that pushed the possibilities of CG beyond what anyone thought was possible. And then, after directing 4 science fiction movies in a row, each more difficult than the last, it seems, to film, although there's a toss-up between the difficulty of the Abyss and Terminator 2. The difficulties on Terminator 2 were probably just due to time constraints. But Cameron was kind of ready for a change on his next film. He didn't want to do another big budget sci-fi movie that was going to, take years of his life. He thought, maybe I'll do a character drama, maybe I'll do a comedy. Well, his next movie is a character drama and is a comedy, but it's also a James Cameron movie, which means it's also a movie where, he lands a Harrier jet on the top of a fucking building. So, so that's the movie we're going to be talking about on our next episode of Cinema Shock. James Cameron's next and to date final team up with Arnold Schwarzenegger, 1994's True Lies. Yeah. And I will go ahead and apologize if you're having a hard time finding True Lies, because we talked about this off mic, but it is notoriously hard to find. The DVD is long out of print. There has never been a Blu-ray or 4K release. It is not streaming. So hopefully you've seen it. Or hopefully you can go on eBay and buy you a copy of the DVD that's 20 years old, which is
that was really weird. Like I want us to dig in on why that might be, because
it's just because James Cameron has approval on on his home video releases and on the transfer, and he's got other things on his mind, like making a bunch of new Avatar movies. So that's
it's kind of garbage that these movies are out there, and I don't know.
It's wild to me that it's not at least streaming or something. But
you should at least have like the standard definition version streaming somewhere. I mean, Jesus. Yeah. Like the movie is
the Abyss was that way too.
That time. Yeah, but I just, gosh, I feel like, I mean, as far as my memory goes, True Lies was bigger than the
Abyss. Was huge. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I don't know. It's just weird. As far as the Terminator franchise goes, I guess, according to that New York Times article, I mean, he had something to do with Dark Fate. I didn't know anything about that.
He executive produced it. Yeah, that's the first Terminator movie, I think, since Terminator 2 that he's had any direct involvement in. But he was an executive producer on that one. I don't think he wrote it or anything. Tim Miller, the guy who did Deadpool, directed it. But
I saw some stuff with Wisher and him talking about, like by the time Terminator 3 was rolling around and some of that interview stuff. And he said, like, quote, when I was in post on Titanic, I was approached on Terminator 3. And I said, I'm just not that. I mean, I told the story.
He said that after part 1 too. So.
Yeah, he did.
Somebody offered him enough money.
Yeah, so I guess they just gotta find the way. But
now he doesn't need the money as much, I guess.
Wisher said that their goal was they wrapped it with there was no quote, there are no back doors in this film. We wrote this movie so that the fat lady sings, which is, that was from Fangoria, I guess, in an interview he did. But I guess you say that and you'll find a way if the cash is right. But
right. Now he's at a point where he doesn't need that, so he can do whatever he wants. So anyway, True Lies is going to be our next episode. I hope you guys can find a copy of it, watch along with us. Maybe if you're listening to this, episode a couple years down the line and not listening to it right when it comes out, then that will have been remedied and you'll be able to find a badass 4K restoration of it. But
can I give props to Bill Wisher, by the way, real quick, to say that but besides just the obvious props that Terminator 2 and Terminator and all that shit's good. Just that people tried in multiple interviews to ask him about what he thought about future Terminator movies. And he definitely in every one says, I have a rule. If my pen didn't go to paper about this movie, I don't have anything to say about it.
That's a good rule.
Yeah.
You don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. That's his version of that.
Yeah. I was like, wow, props to that guy. He
Yeah.
doesn't get himself into any shit.
No, that's the way to live your life right there.
Right.
I like that. Well, that's it for this episode of Cinema Shock. Where can you gentlemen, and I use the term loosely, be found on the internet?
Well, it turns out your mom is loosely on everything she does too. So, no. I'm at This Is Gary Horne. You can find me there or on Justice Mom's OnlyFans or no, I'm sorry. I respect Justin and his family. So.
Yeah, her birthday was yesterday. To show she's such a
What's wrong with me? Where was he? Who do you think popped out of that cake, Justin? No.
This is Gary Horne.
This is Gary Horne.
This is the NWA. No, this is pro wrestling.
This is pro wrestling at NWA. All that stuff. You can find stuff.
This is pro wrestling's been going on pretty.
We're building up for a comeback. I've got 6 interviews in the bag, ready to go. It's just been a slow I filmed these I've taken all the lessons I've learned from Cinema Shock, and these are multiple camera angle interviews.
Nice.
And so I'm editing is a whole thing.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome though. And I've also noticed, Gary, that you've been pretty active on Letterboxd here lately.
Well, stay tuned for next week for the in between show. And I'll tell you all about everything I've seen that I've documented on Letterboxd, because yes, I try to make it a point to record everything in Letterboxd.
Yeah, it's been great. I read your reviews, Gary,
even if they're terrible. I'm not the best writer in the world or anything, but I'm trying to be honest now.
Yeah, you get your views across. How about you, Todd? Not using Letterboxd.
Yeah, no, that's on my list of things I need to improve. But yes, it's
a long list.
Yeah, it's a very long list and getting longer by the day. If you enjoyed some of our Star Trek chat earlier in this episode, check out my podcast, the Computer Resume podcast, where we cover the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order with seemingly endless rotating panel of guests, from comedians and actors and musicians and writers and DIYers. I'm sorry?
And podcast hosts.
Yes, and podcast hosts, including just recently recorded an episode with Mr. Justin Bishop. Gary has been on the show. Well, both Gary and Justin have both been on the show.
It makes sense now, though, why I got the text message the other day that the no skip function on the intro to Discovery, or not Discovery,
no, Enterprise.
Was
still mad about it.
But you can find the Computer Resume podcast at Computer Resume on all of the socials. Please, if you enjoy it, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Our Patreon page is up, is live. We actually have a supporter. So
Oh,
we're gonna do it one at a time. If I have to go knocking on doors.
Hey, you know, we might have a Patreon for Cinema Shock one of these days too. We've got some ideas.
Absolutely. And you can also find me at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Discord, and D&D Beyond.
Hey. And I am at Justin_Bishop. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. You can find the show at Cinema_Shock on Twitter and Instagram. We're also on Facebook. We're also on Discord. Go to cinemashock.net. You can find all of our episodes, all of our series. You can find a link to our Discord. You can find a link to our Threadless shop where you can buy your own Cinema Shock t-shirts and such. Until next time.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
No. You got to listen to the way people talk. You don't say affirmative or some shit like that. You say no problemo. And if someone comes on to you with an attitude, you say eat me. And if you really want to shine them on, it's Johnny has the keys.
Your voice, you didn't have quite enough prepubescent screech to your voice.
It's because I'm a 40-year-old man. My balls touch the water, Justin. My balls touch the water. I'm not going to be able to sound like Edward Furlong.
Now we're less at the age of like wanting our balls to drop to more of the age of like sometimes my testicles get wrapped up in my jazzy scooter.
They need a bit of support.
Well, based on what I did earlier in the show, let me try this one more time. No. You gotta listen to the way people talk. You don't say affirmative or some shit like that or some shite like that. You say no problemo. And if someone comes on to you with an attitude, you say eat me. And if you want to shine them on, Johnny has the keys.
That's John O'Connor.
Thank you, John O'Connor.